A priceless sapphire brooch vanishes from a locked case at a glittering London auction, leaving only a black feather and a name whispered in fear: the Phantom. Who is this shadowy master thief taunting Sherlock Holmes? From foggy dockyards to Paris underworld, Holmes and Watson chase a trail of cryptic clues, velvet scraps, and deadly traps. Is it the reclusive Lady Voss, or a deeper syndicate pulling the strings? As the hunt races through masquerade balls, hidden tunnels, and a secret Viennese auction, each step unveils a web of deception. Can Holmes outwit a foe who thrives on misdirection, or will the Phantom's final bid claim victory? One detective, one thief, one game, where every move could be the last. Chapter 1. The whisper of the auction. The autumn fog curled through London streets like a living thing, wrapping the gaslit avenues of Mayfair in a shroud of mystery. Inside the opulent Claridge's Hotel, the air was thick with anticipation, the kind that hums beneath crystal chandeliers and rustles through silk gowns. The grand ballroom, resplendent with gilded mirrors and polished mahogany, hosted a silent auction of unparalleled prestige, drawing the city's elite like moths to a flame. Rare artifacts, ancient manuscripts, and glittering jewels lay displayed. On velvet draped tables, each item a whispered promise of wealth, status, or secrets. But for Sherlock Holmes, seated unobtrusively in a corner with Dr. John Watson, the true allure was not the treasures, but the puzzle they might conceal. Holmes' sharp gray eyes scanned the room, his lean frame motionless in a tailored black suit that blended seamlessly with the shadowed alcove. Beside him, Watson fidgeted, his mustache twitching as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Really, Holmes," he muttered, glancing at the program in his hand, "a silent auction? Hardly the den of villainy you usually drag me into. What's so special about this one?" Holmes' lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "My dear Watson, the most dangerous dens are often the most polished. Observe the room. Wealth, ambition, and desperation mingle here like a volatile chemical brew. Something is amiss, I can feel it in the air, like the tremor before a storm." Watson raised an eyebrow, accustomed to his friend's penchant for the dramatic but never quite immune to its pull. "You're saying someone's planning to steal something? In a room full of lords, ladies, and armed guards?" "Not steal, perhaps," Holmes replied, his voice low, "but manipulate. Silent auctions are a game of shadows bids written in secret, identities cloaked. The perfect stage for a cunning mind to operate unseen." Before Watson could press further, a ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a monocle and a voice like polished brass, stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we now present Lot 47, the Star of Khartoum, a sapphire brooch once owned by a Mughal empress, its facet said to hold the light of 1,000 desert suns. Bidding begins at £50,000. A murmur swept the room as a spotlight illuminated the brooch, its deep blue heart pulsing under the chandelier's glow. Encased in a glass dome on a central pedestal, it seemed to draw every eye, including Holmes. Watson leaned closer. "That's the prize, then? You think someone's after it?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked from the brooch to the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the quick glances, the hands clutching champagne flutes a little too tightly. "The brooch is a beacon," he said finally. "It draws attention, but it's the bidder I'm watching. For someone here is not what they seem." The silent auction proceeded with a rhythm as precise as a metronome. Guests drifted to the bidding tables, scribbling their offers on embossed cards and slipping them into locked boxes. Holmes, however, remained seated, his fingers steepled, his mind a whirl of observation. Watson, growing restless, decided to play the part of a curious guest and wandered toward the brooch's display. He noted the two burly guards flanking it, their eyes scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. The glass case was sealed, its lock gleaming with modern intricacy. "No one's getting through that without a key," Watson muttered to himself. Returning to Holmes' side. "Or without ingenuity," Holmes replied, having overheard despite the distance. "Locks are merely puzzles, Watson, and puzzles are made to be solved." As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew taut. The final bids were collected, and the auctioneer returned to announce the winners. When Lot 47 was called, a hush fell. "The Star of Khartoum," the auctioneer declared, "has been won by an anonymous bidder for the astonishing sum of £120,000. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by whispers. Watson frowned. "Anonymous? Who bids that much and hides their name?" "Someone with something to hide," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "Or someone playing a deeper game." The auctioneer gestured to the pedestal, where an attendant approached to retrieve the brooch for its new owner. But as the glass dome was lifted, a collective gasp replaced the murmurs. The velvet cushion was bare. The Star of Khartoum was gone. Chaos erupted in an instant. Ladies clutched their pearls, gentlemen shouted for the guards, and the auctioneer's monocle popped from his eye in shock. Watson leapt to his feet, his military instincts kicking in. "Holmes, it's vanished! Right under their noses!" Holmes remained seated, his expression one of intense, almost predatory focus. "Not vanished, Watson, taken, and with exquisite precision." The guards sealed the exits, and the hotel manager, a portly man with a sweating brow, demanded calm. "No. One leaves until we search," he bellowed, his voice cracking under the weight of impending scandal. Guests protested, but the mood had shifted from elegance to suspicion. Holmes, however, was already moving, his long strides carrying him to the pedestal. Watson followed, dodging indignant aristocrats. The pedestal was unmarred, the lock intact. Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the cushion. "No scratches, no signs of forced entry," he murmured. The glass was opened with a key or a perfect replica. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "And look there, Watson." On the floor, half hidden by the pedestal's shadow, lay a single black feather, its quill sharp as a blade. Holmes plucked it up, twirling it between his fingers. "Our thief has a flair for the dramatic," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "A signature, perhaps. The Phantom of the Silent Auction, as the papers will no doubt call them." Watson blinked. "You're already naming them?" "Holmes, we don't even know who they are." "Precisely why we must begin," Holmes replied, tucking the feather into his pocket. "Come, Watson. The game is afoot." The hotel manager, Mr. Clarence, approached, wringing his hands. "Mr. Holmes, thank heaven you're here. This is a disaster. The brooch irreplaceable." "The reputation of Claridge's will survive," Holmes interrupted coolly. "But only if you cooperate. I need the guest list, the staff roster, and access to the auction room after the guests are searched. No exceptions." Clarence nodded vigorously, his jowls quivering. Of course. Anything you need." As the guests were herded into a side room for searches, Holmes and Watson began their investigation. The auction room, now eerily quiet, was a maze of opulence marble. Columns, velvet curtains, and tables strewn with bidding cards. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes darting from the chandelier's prisms to the floor's intricate parquet. "The thief was here all evening," he said. "They knew the layout, the guards' patterns, the exact moment to strike." Watson, examining the bidding box for Lot 47, frowned. "Holmes, these cards, they're all accounted for, but the winning bid. It's written in a different ink. Look, it's faintly green." Holmes peered over his shoulder, his expression sharpening. "Well spotted, Watson. Most inks here are black or blue, standard fountain pens. Green ink suggests premeditation, a personal touch." He lifted the card, holding it to the light. "And the handwriting, precise, almost calligraphic. Our phantom is educated, meticulous." A young woman in a server's uniform approached, her eyes wide with nervous energy. "Mr. Holmes?" "I'm Elsie, one of the waitresses. I saw something odd tonight." Holmes turned, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "Speak freely, Elsie. Every detail matters." She twisted her apron in her hands. "There was a guest, a woman, I think, though she kept her face turned. She was near the brooches display all evening, but she never bid. She just watched. And when the bidding closed, she slipped behind a curtain. I thought she was just powdering her nose, but—" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Which curtain?" Elsie pointed to a heavy velvet drape near the pedestal. Holmes crossed to it, parting the fabric to reveal a narrow service door, barely visible against the wall's paneling. "A concealed exit," he said. "Locked from the outside, but not the inside. The perfect escape for someone who planned their route." Watson ran a hand through his hair. "So the phantom was among the guests, watched the brooch, and slipped out during the chaos? But how did they get the key?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was examining the door's lock, his fingers tracing its edges. "No key was needed," he said finally. "This lock was picked expertly. See the faint scratches? The work of a professional, not an amateur with a hairpin. The search of the guests yielded nothing, no brooch, no suspicious tools." The manager returned, his face ashen. "Mr. Holmes, we've checked every pocket, every purse. Nothing. It's as if the brooch dissolved into thin air." "Nothing dissolves, Mr. Clarence," Holmes said sharply. "It was removed, and I intend to find it. I'll need the blueprints of this hotel, particularly the service passages, and the names of every locksmith who worked on that display case." As Clarence scurried off, Watson leaned closer. "Holmes, you're enjoying this, aren't you? A thief who leaves feathers and picks locks without a trace. It's like they're daring you." Holmes' smile was razor-thin. "They are, Watson. And I accept the challenge." The night stretched on, the fog outside thickening as Holmes and Watson pored over the guest list. Names of dukes, heiresses, and foreign dignitaries filled the pages, but one stood out: Lady Eleanor Vos, a reclusive aristocrat with a rumored passion for rare gems. She had attended but left early, citing illness. Holmes tapped her name with a finger. "A convenient exit," he mused. "We shall pay Lady Vos a visit tomorrow." Watson yawned, the hour nearing midnight. "And what about tonight? The trail's cold, Holmes." "Cold, perhaps, but not dead," Holmes replied. He held up the black feather, its edges catching the lamplight. "This is no ordinary thief, Watson. The phantom has planned every move, anticipated every countermove. But they've made one mistake. They've caught my attention." The chapter closed with Holmes standing by the ballroom's window, the fog pressing against the glass like a conspirator. Watson watched him, knowing that look, the relentless, almost feverish focus of a mind fully engaged. The star of Khartoum was gone, but the hunt had begun, and Sherlock Holmes was already several steps ahead in a game only he could see. The black feather, tucked into his pocket, was a promise. The phantom's audacity would be their undoing. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Ledger, the morning after the audacious theft at Claridge's Hotel. London awoke under a shroud of mist, the kind that clung to the cobblestones and dulled the clatter of horse-drawn carriages. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair at 221B Baker Street, his violin resting idly on his lap, though his fingers twitched as if itching to pluck a discordant note to match the puzzle in his mind. The sapphire brooch, stolen with surgical precision from a locked display case, was no ordinary trinket. It was a rare piece from the House of Romanov, rumored to carry a curse that had felled its last 3 owners. The black feather left behind by the thief, whom the press had already dubbed the Phantom, lay on the table before him, its quill gleaming faintly in the gaslight. Dr. John Watson, ever the steadfast chronicler, sat at the desk, scribbling notes from the previous night's events. His pen scratched rhythmically, pausing only when he glanced at Holmes, who seemed lost in a reverie. "Holmes," Watson ventured, "you've been staring at that feather for an hour. Have you deduced anything beyond its obvious avian origin?" Holmes' lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the feather. "Obvious, Watson? Nothing is obvious until it is proven. This feather is not merely a calling card. It is a taunt, a deliberate flourish meant to distract. The phantom wishes us to chase shadows, but I intend to chase facts." He rose abruptly, his lean frame casting a sharp silhouette against the fogged window. "The auction records, Watson. They will tell us more than this theatrical prop. Fetch your coat, we're off to Claridge's." The hotel's opulent ballroom, still fragrant with the lingering scent of champagne and beeswax, was a stark contrast to the grim purpose of their visit. The manager, Mr. Percival Grayson, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow, greeted them with a mixture of deference and unease. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I assure you we've turned the place upside down." The display case was triple locked, the guards vetted, the guests impeccable. Yet the brooch is gone, and that blasted feather mocks us all. Holmes paced the room, his eyes darting from the velvet-lined display case to the polished mahogany tables where bids had been placed. "Impeccable guests, you say?" "No one is impeccable, Mr. Grayson. Even the most polished veneer hides cracks. I require the guest list, the bidding ledger, and every scrap of correspondence related to the auction. Leave nothing out." Grayson hesitated, his fingers twisting a gold cufflink. "The guest list is delicate. Our patrons value discretion." Holmes fixed him with a stare that could have cut glass. "Discretion, Mr. Grayson, is a luxury the phantom has already violated. You will provide the documents, or I shall assume you have something to hide." Within the hour, Holmes and Watson were ensconced in a private office, surrounded by stacks of paper. The guest list read like a who's who of London's elite, dukes, diplomats, and dilettantes, their names scrawled in elegant script. The bidding ledger, however, was a labyrinth of numbers, with bids escalating in erratic bursts for the sapphire brooch. Holmes' fingers traced the entries, his brow furrowing as he noted anomalies. "Look here, Watson," he said, pointing to a series of bids under the pseudonym Corvus. The bids start modestly, then spike dramatically in the final moments, outpacing even the Duke of Clarence's offer. Yet Corvus never collected the brooch, because it was stolen before. They could. Curious, don't you think? Watson leaned over, squinting at the ledger. "A decoy bidder, perhaps? To drive up the price?" "Possibly," Holmes murmured, "but the pattern suggests intent beyond profit. Notice the timing. Each bid from Corvus was placed just as another bidder hesitated, as if they knew precisely when to strike. This was no impulsive act. The phantom, or their agent, was in that room watching." Their investigation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young clerk, barely out of his teens, entered with a tray of tea and a nervous glance. "Begging your pardon, sirs, but Mr. Grayson thought you might need refreshment. Also, there's a lady outside insisting on speaking with you. Says it's about the auction." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Her name?" "Lady Eleanor Voss, sir." The name sparked a flicker of recognition in Holmes' mind. Lady Voss, a reclusive aristocrat, had been among the guests but had vanished shortly after the auction's close, her absence noted by the society gossips. "Send her in," Holmes said, his tone clipped. Lady Eleanor Voss swept into the room like a winter gale, her emerald green gown rustling with each step. Her face, framed by auburn curls, was striking yet severe, with eyes that seemed to weigh every detail of the room. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice low and measured, "I understand you're investigating the theft. I may have information." Holmes gestured to a chair, his expression unreadable. "Pray, enlighten us, Lady Voss. Your sudden departure last night raised eyebrows." She stiffened, but her composure held. "I left because I felt unwell, nothing more." But I overheard something during the auction, a conversation between two men near the refreshment table. They spoke of a black bird and a delivery to be made at the docks. I thought it odd, given the feather found later. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Describe these men. One was tall, with a scar across his left cheek. The other was shorter, with a limp and a heavy accent, Russian, I believe. They seemed anxious, glancing about as if expecting to be overheard. Watson scribbled furiously, while Holmes' mind raced. The black feather, the pseudonym Corvus, Latin for crow or raven, suggested a motif, perhaps a code. Did you see them leave together? He asked. No. Lady Voss replied. The scarred man left alone, but the other lingered, watching the display case. I thought nothing of it until the theft was announced. Holmes studied her, noting the faint tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided his for a fraction too long. You have a keen interest in gems, do you not, Lady Voss? Your collection is rumored to rival the Crown's. Her lips tightened. A hobby, Mr. Holmes, not a crime. I bid on the brooch, yes, but I was outbid by Corvus. I have no reason to steal what I could not afford. Yet you left before the theft was discovered, Holmes pressed. And now you offer this convenient tale of overheard intrigue. Why come forward now? She rose, her chin lifting defiantly. Because I wish this thief caught, Mr. Holmes. If you doubt me, investigate my estate. You'll find nothing but books and baubles. After she departed, Watson turned to Holmes. She's hiding something, isn't she? Undoubtedly, Holmes replied, already flipping through the ledger again. Her story is plausible, yet too neatly tailored. She knows more than she admits, but whether she's the phantom or merely a pawn remains to be seen. We must visit her estate, Watson, but first, this ledger holds another secret. He pointed to a faint smudge beside the Corvus bids, a series of numbers and letters. Barely legible, scribbled in pencil. A code, Holmes said, his voice tinged with excitement. Sloppy for one so meticulous. Fetch me a magnifying glass. Under the glass, the smudge revealed itself as a cipher. LN to DK 234 AM. Holmes' eyes gleamed. London docks. Watson. A meeting, set for 4 in the morning on the 23rd. The Phantom's next move. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Holmes dispatched telegrams to his network of informants, seeking word of a scarred man or a limping Russian. Meanwhile, Watson ventured to Lady Voss's estate in Kensington, posing as a physician, offering a courtesy call after her illness. The estate, a sprawling Gothic manor, was as much a museum as a home, its halls lined with glass cases displaying gems that glittered like captive stars. The butler, a doorman named Hargreaves, was tight-lipped but confirmed Lady Voss's obsession with rare stones, particularly sapphires. She spent a fortune on them, he admitted, but she's no thief. Watson's search turned up little else, save for a locked study that Hargreaves claimed was off-limits. Returning to Baker Street, he found Holmes hunched over a map of the London docks, the ledger open beside him. Her estate is a fortress, Watson reported. If she's involved, she's hidden her tracks well. She would, Holmes sighed, not looking up. But this cipher is our key. The docks are a warren of secret smugglers, fences, and worse. If the Phantom is moving the brooch, they'll need a buyer, and the docks are where such deals are struck. We must be there at 4. The night was cold and thick with fog as Holmes and Watson made their way to the docks, their footsteps muffled by the damp air. The Thames lapped sluggishly against the wharves, its surface a mirror of inky black. They concealed themselves behind a stack of crates, the stench of tar and fish heavy in the air. Holmes' eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the shadows dot at precisely 4. A figure emerged from the mist, a tall man, his left cheek marred by a jagged scar. He carried a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, and moved with the caution of a man expecting trouble. Another figure joined him, shorter, with a pronounced limp. Their voices were low, but Holmes' keen ears caught fragments. "The bird has flown." "Delivery secure." "Voss will pay." Holmes stiffened at the mention of Lady Voss. Before he could signal Watson, a third figure darted from the shadows, snatching the bundle and vanishing into the fog. The scarred man cursed, drawing a knife. But the limping man restrained him. "Not here," he hissed, his accent unmistakably Russian. "The phantom will deal with it." As the men retreated, Holmes and Watson gave chase, but the fog swallowed their quarry. All that remained was a torn scrap of velvet, caught on a splintered crate. Holmes held it to the light, his expression grim. "This matches the auction." "Room's drapery," he said. "The phantom was here, or someone close to them. We're dealing with a network. Watson and Lady Voss is at its heart." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the velvet scrap beside the black feather, his mind a whirl of connections. The cipher, the velvet, the overheard conversation all pointed to a conspiracy deeper than a single theft. Lady Voss's name loomed large, but the phantom's identity remained elusive. A shadow within a shadow. "We must tread carefully," Holmes said, lighting his pipe. "The phantom is no ordinary thief. They play a long game, and we've only glimpsed the board. Tomorrow we visit the docks again, and I'll wager we'll find more than velvet to guide us." Watson nodded, though unease gnawed at him. The phantom's audacity, the web of clues, and Lady Voss's enigmatic role suggested a case that would test even Holmes' genius. As the fog thickened outside, Watson could only wonder what shadows awaited them in the chapters yet to unfold. Chapter 3. The dockyard gambit. The fog clung to the Thames like a conspirator's cloak, muffling the clatter of distant hansoms and the mournful cries of gulls. Sherlock Holmes stood motionless at the edge of Wapping's docks, his sharp silhouette cutting through the mist. His greatcoat flapped lightly in the damp breeze, and his eyes, narrowed to slits, scanned the shadowed outlines of cranes and crates. Dr. John Watson, a pace behind, shifted uneasily, his hand resting on the reassuring weight of his service revolver in his coat pocket. The air was thick with the tang of tar and salt, and the faint creak of moored ships swayed in rhythm with the river's pulse. "It's past midnight." "Holmes," Watson whispered, his breath clouding in the chill. "Are you certain this is Eyes?" "The place?" Holmes' lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, though his gaze never wavered from the darkened dockyard. "The coded message in the auction ledger was precise, Watson. When the tide kisses the moon, the shadow meets the sparrow at Wapping. The tide is high, the moon is full, and we are precisely where the phantom intends to conduct their business. Patience, my dear friend. The game is afoot." Watson adjusted his scarf, suppressing a shiver. The cryptic note Holmes had deciphered from the auction's financial records had led them here, to this desolate stretch of London's waterfront, where the city's pulse faded into the lawless murmur of the docks. The silent auction at Claridge's, where a sapphire brooch had vanished under impossible circumstances, had ignited Holmes' curiosity. The thief, dubbed the Phantom by the press for their ghostly elusiveness, had left a single black feather as their calling card, a taunt that Holmes found both infuriating and exhilarating. The dockyard was a labyrinth of wooden crates, rusted anchors, and coiled ropes, its edges swallowed by the fog. Holmes had positioned them behind a stack of barrels, their vantage point offering a clear view of a narrow alley between two warehouses. The coded message suggested a meeting, and Holmes was determined to catch the phantom in the act. Watson, though accustomed to Holmes' nocturnal vigils, felt the weight of the silence pressing against his nerves. A faint scuff broke the stillness, a boot on cobblestone. Holmes' hand shot up, signaling Watson to remain still. From the alley emerged two figures, their forms blurred by the mist. One was tall and lean, cloaked in a dark overcoat, their face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The other was shorter, stockier, with a sailor's rolling gait. They paused under a flickering gas lamp, their voices low but carrying in the quiet. "You've got it?" The taller figure hissed, their voice sharp and clipped, betraying a hint of impatience. The stocky man patted a bulging satchel slung across his chest. Right air. But I ain't handin' it over till I see the coin. The taller figure produced a small pouch, jingling it softly. As agreed. Now the item. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes glinting with predatory focus. Watson's heart quickened. This could be the phantom, or at least a link to them. The stocky man opened his satchel, revealing a glint of something metallic. But before he could fully display it, a third shadow detached from the fog. Swift and silent, it darted toward the pair, and in an instant, a blade flashed under the gaslight. The stocky man yelped, clutching his arm, as the satchel fell to the ground with a dull thud. Holmes! Watson whispered urgently, but Holmes was already moving, his long legs carrying him toward the melee with the grace of a panther. Watson followed, revolver drawn, as the third figure, the phantom, surely snatched the satchel and bolted down the alley. After them. Holmes barked, his voice cutting through the fog like a whip. The chase was chaotic. The dockyard's maze of crates and ropes a treacherous obstacle course. The phantom was a wraith, weaving through shadows with uncanny agility. Holmes, undeterred, vaulted over a low stack of barrels, his coat billowing behind him. Watson, less nimble, struggled to keep pace, his boots slipping on the slick cobblestones. The phantom rounded a corner, disappearing into a narrow gap between two warehouses. Holmes skidded to a halt, his eyes scanning the ground. "There," he said, pointing to a torn scrap of velvet caught on a splintered crate. He plucked it up, holding it to the gaslight. Dark blue, fine weave identical to the drapery in Claridge's auction room. "Our phantom was there, Watson, and they've left us a breadcrumb." Watson caught his breath, peering at the fabric. An insider, then? Someone with access to the auction? "Precisely," Holmes replied, tucking the velvet into his pocket. "But this is no mere thief. The phantom's movements are too calculated, their knowledge too intimate. Come, we must speak to the dockworker who witnessed this exchange." They retraced their steps to the gas lamp, where the two figures from the meeting still stood, the taller one tending to the stocky man's wounded arm. The taller figure, a gaunt man with a hawkish nose, glared at Holmes as he approached. "Who the devil are you?" he demanded, his accent tinged with the clipped precision of the upper class. "Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective," Holmes said smoothly, his tone disarming yet laced with authority. "And this is Dr. Watson. We seek information about the individual who just relieved you of your satchel." The stocky man, a burly dockworker with a weathered face, cursed under his breath. "That blasted shadow. Cut me good, they did. Didn't even see their face." Holmes crouched beside him, examining the shallow gash on his arm. A clean cut, precise. "The phantom is no amateur with a blade. Tell me, what was in the satchel?" The dockworker hesitated, glancing at his companion. The taller man, who introduced himself as Mr. Clarence Vane, a merchant of dubious repute, answered instead. "Just a trinket, a brass locket, nothing worth this trouble." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "A locket valuable enough to draw a blade in the dead of night? I think not. Speak plainly, Mr. Vane, or I shall have Inspector Lestrade's men here within the hour." Vane's composure faltered, his fingers twitching at his side. "All right," he muttered. It was a gemma sapphire, small but flawless. "I was to deliver it to a buyer, but that cursed phantom got to it first." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. A sapphire, so soon after the brooch's theft? The coincidence was too stark to ignore. "This buyer," Holmes pressed. "Who were they?" The dockworker, now bandaged by Watson's quick hands, spoke up. "Didn't give a name. Just said to meet air. Midnight sharp. But I've seen their kind before runnin' with the Black Anchor gang, smugglers mostly. They move goods through the docks, no questions asked." "The Black Anchor," Holmes mused, his mind already racing through the implications. A smuggling ring with ties to the continent. Watson, this affair grows more intricate by the hour. The Phantom is not merely a thief, but a cog in a larger machine. As they questioned Vane and the dockworker further, the fog thickened, swallowing. The gas lamps glow. Holmes extracted every detail. The Black Anchor's rumored hideout in Limehouse, their use of coded signals via ship lanterns, and a whispered name, Captain Mordecai, a smuggler kingpin who operated from a derelict schooner moored off Shadwell. The dockworker, eager to avoid police scrutiny, offered one final tidbit. The Phantom had been seen wearing a peculiar ring, a silver band with a raven's head crest. Holmes dismissed the men with a warning to stay clear of the docks for their own safety. As they vanished into the mist, Watson turned to him. "What now, Holmes?" "The Phantom slipped through our fingers again." "Not entirely," Holmes replied, his voice tinged with satisfaction. He held up the scrap of velvet once more. "This fabric ties the Phantom to Claridge's, and the dockworker's testimony points to the Black Anchor. We have a thread to pull, Watson. The Phantom is bold, but they've underestimated us. Tomorrow we infiltrate their network." The next morning, London awoke under a slate-gray sky, the city's pulse quickening with the clang of bells and the shouts of newsboys. Holmes, ensconced in their Baker Street rooms, pored over a map of the Thames, marking known smuggling routes. Watson, nursing a cup of tea, watched as Holmes' fingers traced the winding river. "The Black Anchor operates with precision," Holmes said, not looking up. "Their schooner, the Eventide, is their hub. If we're to catch the Phantom, we must board that ship. But we cannot simply stroll aboard. Captain Mordecai is no fool. We need a guise." Watson raised an eyebrow. "A disguise? You mean to pose as smugglers?" "Exactly," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "You, Watson, shall be a disgraced naval surgeon turned contraband dealer. I shall be your contact, a fence from Bristol with a penchant for rare gems. We'll offer Mordecai a deal he can't refuse, a fictitious diamond shipment, ripe for the taking." Watson chuckled despite himself. "You've a flair for the dramatic, Holmes, but won't they suspect us?" "Not if we play our parts well," Holmes replied, rising to rummage through a trunk of disguises. He produced a tattered sailor's cap and a false beard, transforming himself into a grizzled seafarer in minutes. Watson, less enthusiastic, donned a weathered jacket and practiced a gruff tone. By dusk, they were at Shadwell Basin, where the Eventide loomed like a specter against the darkening sky. The schooner was a relic, its hull scarred by years at sea, but its deck bustled with activity. Rough men hauled crates under the watchful eye of a broad-shouldered figure, Captain Mordecai, his face a map of scars and suspicion. Holmes now. Jack Tarley from Bristol approached with a swagger, Watson trailing as Dr. Amos Crane. The captain eyed them warily as Holmes spun a tale of a diamond shipment smuggled from Antwerp, ripe for a buyer with Mordecai's connections. The captain's greed flickered, but his caution held firm. "You'll need to prove your worth." Mordecai growled, his voice like gravel. "Meet my quartermaster at the Crow's Nest Tavern tonight. Bring a sample of your goods." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. As they left the schooner, Watson whispered, "Did you see that ring on his finger?" A raven's head, just as the dockworker described. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Indeed. But Mordecai is no phantom. He's too blunt, too tethered to his ship. The ring suggests he's a pawn, not the mastermind. The quartermaster may hold the key." The Crow's Nest was a dingy tavern buried in Limehouse's warren of alleys, its air thick with tobacco and cheap gin. The quartermaster, a wiry man named Silas Crow, awaited them at a corner table, his eyes darting like a ferret's. Holmes slid a velvet pouch across the table, containing a glass bauble masquerading as a diamond. Crow examined it, his fingers lingering on the velvet, a match for the scrap from the docks. "You've got my attention," Crow said, his voice low. But the boss wants more than trinkets. There's a job tomorrow night, a big one. Be at the old sugar warehouse by the Isle of Dogs, 2 Bring your diamonds, and maybe we'll talk. Holmes agreed, his mind already dissecting Crow's words. As they left the tavern, a shadow flitted across the alley, a figure in a hooded cloak, too swift to pursue. Watson gripped his revolver, but Holmes stayed his hand. "The phantom watches us," Holmes murmured. "They know we're close. Tomorrow night, Watson, we'll spring our trap." The sugar warehouse was a crumbling relic, its windows boarded, its air heavy with the ghost of molasses. Holmes and Watson arrived early, concealing themselves in the rafters. Below, crates were stacked haphazardly, a perfect stage for an ambush. At precisely 2 a.m., Crow appeared with 2 others, their faces obscured by scarves. But the phantom was absent, or so it seemed. As Crow inspected a crate, a faint click echoed from the shadows. Holmes' eyes widened. "A trap," he hissed, grabbing Watson and diving behind a stack of barrels. A moment later, a net of heavy ropes crashed down, narrowly missing them. Crow and his men scattered, shouting. As a cloaked figure, the phantom emerged from a trapdoor, satchel in hand. Holmes lunged, tackling the phantom before they could vanish. The satchel fell, spilling a cascade of glittering fakes glass. Gems, not sapphires. The phantom twisted free, their cloak tearing as they fled through the trapdoor. Holmes, undeterred, retrieved the torn fabric, another piece of Claridge's velvet. Watson panted, brushing dust from his coat. "They're toying with us, Holmes. Glass gems? What's their game?" Holmes held up the velvet, his expression grimly satisfied. "The phantom is testing us, Watson. They deal in deception, not just theft. This velvet confirms their connection to Claridge's, and the Black Anchor's involvement ties them to a larger web. We've not caught them tonight, but we've narrowed their allies. The hunt continues." As they emerged into the pre-dawn chill, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling into the fog. The phantom had slipped through their fingers, but the dockyard gambit had yielded clues: a smuggling ring, a velvet trail, and a raven's head ring. The game was far from over, and Holmes, his mind alight with the thrill of the chase, felt the net tightening around their elusive quarry. Chapter 4. The Velvet Clue. The fog clung to London streets like a conspirator's cloak, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of newsboys. Sherlock Holmes strode through Soho, his greatcoat flapping like the wings of some predatory bird, his eyes scanning the labyrinth of narrow alleys. Beside him, Dr. John Watson struggled to match his pace, his breath puffing in the chill November air. The torn scrap of velvet from the dockyard, a deep burgundy flecked with gold thread, lay heavy in Holmes' pocket, a slender thread in the tapestry of the phantom's scheme. "Holmes, are we certain this velvet will lead us anywhere?" Watson asked, dodging a puddle that reflected the dim glow of a gas lamp. "It's just a bit of cloth, after all." Holmes' lips twitched, not quite a smile. "A bit of cloth, Watson? It is a signature. The phantom is meticulous, yet they left this behind. Deliberate or careless, it is a crack in their armor. And cracks, my dear friend, are where I begin." Their destination was a modest tailor shop tucked between a gin-soaked tavern and a pawnbroker's den. The sign above the door read Finch & Sons, Bespoke Tailoring, though the peeling paint and grimy windows suggested the Sons had long since abandoned the trade. Holmes had traced the velvet's unique weave to this shop, guided by a memory of a case years prior involving a smuggler's coat lined with the same rare fabric. The shop's reputation for discretion and its rumored ties to less savory clientele made it a promising lead. Holmes pushed open the door, a bell jangling discordantly. The interior was dim, cluttered with bolts of fabric and half-finished garments draped over mannequins like ghostly sentinels. A faint scent of mothballs and tobacco hung in the air. Behind a cluttered counter, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose looked up from a ledger, his hands stained. with ink and thread, froze mid-motion. "Mr. Finch, I presume?" Holmes said, his voice smooth but edged with authority. The man Finch blinked rapidly, his fingers twitching toward a drawer. That's me. What's this about? I don't know you." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Finch's. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are here about a certain velvet, burgundy with gold thread, recently torn. I believe it originated from your shop." Finch's face paled, his spectacles slipping further down his nose. "Velvet? I sell all sorts, sir. Could be anyone's. I don't keep track of every scrap." Holmes leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Come now, Mr. Finch. Your shop is known for its exclusive clientele. A velvet of such quality, woven in lions and imported at great expense, does not find its way into common hands. Shall we discuss your records, or would you prefer I deduce their contents?" Watson, sensing the tension, shifted his weight, his hand resting near the revolver in his coat pocket. Finch's eyes darted between the two men, then to the door. As if calculating his odds of escape, he sagged, defeated, and gestured toward a curtain at the back of the shop. All right. Come through. But I ain't promising nothing." Behind the curtain lay a cramped workroom, its walls lined with shelves of fabric and sewing tools. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows, giving the space an almost conspiratorial air. Finch pulled a thick ledger from a locked drawer, his hands trembling as he opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous notes orders, measurements, and cryptic abbreviations. Holmes scanned the ledger, his fingers tracing columns of numbers and names. "This," he said, tapping a line, "is no ordinary tailor's record. These entries, crimson veil, ebony mask, are not garments, but code names. You've been crafting disguises, Mr. Finch, for someone who prefers to remain unseen." Finch's voice cracked. "I just make what I'm told. A client comes, pays well, and I don't ask questions. They wanted masks, cloaks, things to blend in. I didn't know what for. Who is this client?" Holmes pressed, his gaze unyielding. Finch hesitated, sweat beading on his brow. "I don't know their name. They come at night, always cloaked, voice low, paid in gold sovereigns, no questions asked. Last order was a velvet cloak, burgundy, gold thread. Said it was for a performance." Watson raised an eyebrow. Performance? At the docks?" Finch shook his head frantically. "I don't know where. I just make this stuff. They leave notes, coded like, with instructions. I burn 'em after." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Not all of them, I wager. Show me." Finch fumbled under a pile of fabric scraps, producing a crumpled note. Holmes unfolded it, revealing a series of numbers and symbols scrawled in black ink. To Watson, it looked like gibberish, but Holmes' face lit with recognition. "A Polybius square," he murmured. "Simple yet effective. The Phantom is fond of codes, it seems." As Holmes began deciphering the note, a sudden crash shattered the quiet. The shop's front window exploded inward, glass spraying across the floor. 3 masked figures clad in dark cloaks burst through, their faces hidden behind grotesque leather masks. One brandished a cudgel, another a knife that glinted in the lamplight. "Finch, you fool!" The leader snarled, voice muffled but venomous. "You were told to keep quiet." Watson drew his revolver, but Holmes was already in motion, seizing a tailor's dummy and hurling it at the nearest thug. The man staggered, and Holmes followed with a precise jab to the jaw, sending him sprawling. Watson fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the crack echoing like thunder. The second thug lunged at Finch, but Watson tackled him, pinning him against a shelf that collapsed in a cascade of fabric. The leader, however, was quicker. He grabbed the ledger and bolted for the door, dodging Holmes' attempt to grapple him. Holmes pursued, but the man vanished into the fog, leaving only the echo of boots on cobblestones, breathing heavily. Watson secured the second thug with a length of twine, while the first lay unconscious. Finch cowered behind the counter, muttering apologies. Holmes returned, his expression a mix of frustration and exhilaration. They took the ledger. Watson said, brushing dust from his coat, "But we've got 2 of them." Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "The ledger is a loss, but not a fatal one. The note is the key." He held up the crumpled paper, now partially decoded. "It mentions a masked ball at Sir Reginald Harrow's estate. Our phantom, it seems, is planning their next move." Watson frowned. "But who are these men? Hired muscle?" "Likely," Holmes said, examining the unconscious thug's mask. "Cheap leather, poorly stitched, not Finch's work. The phantom employs layers of intermediaries to shield their identity. But this," he lifted the mask, revealing a distinctive burn. "Mark on the leather. This is a clue. A tannery in Whitechapel uses a similar branding. We shall pay them a visit." Finch, still trembling, stammered, "I didn't know they'd come after me." "I swear, Mr. Holmes, I'm no criminal." Holmes fixed him with a cold stare. "You've profited from crime, Mr. Finch. That makes you complicit. But you may yet redeem yourself. Draw me a sketch of the client's mask." Finch nodded eagerly, grabbing a pencil and paper. His hand steadied as he worked, producing a detailed sketch of a mask with angular cheekbones and a sharp, beak-like nose. "This is it," he said. "They wore it every time." Holmes studied the sketch, his mind racing. A theatrical design, almost operatic. The phantom fancies themselves a performer, weaving deception as art. This mask will be their undoing. As they left the shop, the fog seemed thicker, the air heavier with secrets. Watson glanced at Holmes, who was already lost in thought, his fingers tracing the outline of the sketch in his pocket. "What now, Holmes?" Watson asked. "The masked ball?" "Indeed," Holmes replied, his voice low. "The phantom thrives in shadows, but a ball is a stage, and every stage has its spotlight. We shall shine it upon them." The next morning, Holmes and Watson ventured to Whitechapel, where the tannery's acrid stench greeted them long before its gates. The tannery was a sprawling, ramshackle affair, its yard littered with hides and vats of foul-smelling dye. The foreman, a burly man named Griggs, eyed them suspiciously as Holmes presented the burned mask. "Seen this mark before?" Holmes asked, his tone casual but probing. Griggs shrugged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Could be ours. We supply half the leather in London. What's it to you?" Holmes smiled thinly. "A matter of theft. A sapphire brooch, to be precise. Your leather was found at the scene." Griggs' eyes narrowed, but he gestured toward a stack of ledgers. "Check 'em yourself. I don't track every hide." Holmes spent an hour poring over the records, his fingers stained with ink and grime. Watson, meanwhile, wandered the yard, noting the workers' furtive glances. One, a young lad with a scarred cheek, seemed particularly nervous, slipping away when Watson approached. "Holmes," Watson whispered, returning to his friend. "That boy, something's off." Holmes nodded, closing the ledger. "I've found what I need. A bulk order for leather masks delivered to a warehouse in Shadwell. Anonymous buyer, paid in cash. And our young friend may know more than he lets on." They followed the boy to a nearby alley, where he met a cloaked figure. Holmes signaled Watson to stay back, creeping closer to overhear their hushed conversation. "Told you. I burned the extras," the boy said, voice trembling. "No one's supposed to know." The cloaked figure hissed, "You'd better hope so, or it's your head. The boss don't tolerate mistakes." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the fog. "A mistake has indeed been made. Yours, I'm afraid." The cloaked figure spun, drawing a knife, but Holmes was faster, disarming them with a swift twist of his cane. The boy bolted, but Watson blocked his path, grabbing him by the collar. "Who's your boss?" Holmes demanded, pinning the cloaked figure against the wall. The figure laughed, a low, mocking sound. You think you're close? The phantoms. Always 3 steps ahead. Holmes tightened his grip. Then I shall take 4. The figure said nothing more, but a search of their pockets revealed a key engraved with a raven's head. Holmes pocketed it, releasing the figure with a warning. Tell your master Sherlock Holmes is coming. As the figure vanished into the fog, Watson shook his head. You let them go? Holmes smiled faintly. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, but a bird that flies back to its nest is worth more. That key will lead us to the warehouse in Shadwell. The Shadwell warehouse was a hulking relic of London's industrial past, its windows boarded and its walls streaked with soot. Holmes and Watson approached under cover of dusk, the raven-headed key glinting in Holmes' hand. The lock clicked smoothly, and they slipped inside, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of oil. The warehouse was a maze of crates and barrels, but Holmes' keen eyes spotted a hidden trapdoor beneath a pile of sacks. It led to a basement, where a single lantern illuminated a makeshift workshop. Sketches of masks and cloaks covered the walls, alongside maps marked with auction houses and smuggling routes. Watson whistled softly. This is no small operation. Holmes nodded, examining a half-finished mask identical to Finch's sketch. The phantom is building a persona, a myth. But myths have origins, and origins can be traced. A sudden creak echoed above. Holmes extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Footsteps descended the stairs, slow and deliberate. Watson gripped his revolver, but Holmes signaled for silence, his eyes glinting in the faint moonlight. The intruder lit a match, revealing a face half hidden by a hood. It was the boy from the tannery, carrying a satchel. He froze as Holmes stepped from the shadows. Don't run, Holmes said softly. You've nowhere to go. The boy dropped the satchel, raising his hands. I didn't want no part of this. They made me. Who? Holmes asked, his voice calm but unyielding. The phantom, the boy whispered. I don't know their name, I swear. They pay me to run errands, deliver messages. Said if I talked, they'd know. Holmes picked up the satchel, finding a bundle of letters sealed with black wax. These will tell me what you cannot. Cooperate, and you may yet walk free. The boy nodded, tears in his eyes. There's a ball tomorrow night, at Sir Harrow's place. The phantom's gonna be there masked. That's all I know. Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. Then we shall prepare for a performance of our own. Back at 221 B. Baker Street, Holmes sat by the fire, the letters spread before him. Most were coded, but one, written in plain English, stood out. It was an invitation to Sir Reginald Harrow's masquerade ball, addressed to an E.V. The initials matched Lady Eleanor Voss, but Holmes' expression suggested doubt. E.V. could be anyone, he mused. The phantom delights in misdirection. But this ball is their stage, and I intend to steal the spotlight. Watson, nursing a brandy, frowned. What's our plan then? We can't just waltz in and accuse someone. Holmes' eyes twinkled. Oh, but we shall waltz, Watson. And when the music stops, the phantom will find themselves unmasked. He rose, sketching a psychological profile of the phantom on a sheet of paper. Cunning, theatrical, driven by a need for control. Likely educated, possibly aristocratic, with a grudge against London's elite. The masks and codes suggest a flair for drama, but the velvet and gold hint at wealth or access to it. As the fire crackled, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. The game was afoot, and the phantom's next move was only hours away. Chapter 5. The Masked Ball. The air in London shimmered with anticipation. A rare October evening where the city's pulse quickened under a velvet sky. Claridge's Hotel, its grand facade aglow with golden light, stood as the epicenter of the night's revelry. Sir Reginald Harrow, a collector of eccentric tastes and bottomless wealth, had thrown open his ballroom for a masquerade that promised to eclipse all others. The guest list was a constellation of London's elite dukes, diplomats, and dilettantes, each cloaked in silk and secrecy, their identities veiled by masks of peacock feathers, gilded filigree, and painted porcelain. For Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, the ball was no mere social affair. It was a chessboard where the phantom, the elusive thief who had spirited away a sapphire brooch from a silent auction, might reveal a telltale move. Holmes, disguised as a Venetian nobleman, wore a black domino mask that sharpened the intensity of his hawk-like eyes. His cloak, a cascade of midnight silk, swirled as he moved through the crowd, each step calculated to blend yet observe. Watson, less at ease in his own disguise, a harlequin mask and a burgundy doublet, trailed close behind, his physicians, hands twitching with the urge to steady himself in this sea of opulence. Holmes, Watson whispered, leaning close as they passed a cluster of giggling debutantes. This is madness. How are we to spot the phantom in this carnival of shadows? Holmes' lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. Patience, Watson. The phantom is no ordinary thief. They thrive on spectacle, and this ball is their stage. Look for the one who moves with purpose, not pleasure. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of decadence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across walls draped in crimson damask, while a string quartet wove Vivaldi's notes into the air. Waiters glided like specters, balancing trays of champagne flutes and canapes of smoked salmon and caviar. Masks lent an air of mischief. A lion-faced lord flirted with a swan-masked lady, while a jester in motley jested with a door-faced banker. Yet beneath the revelry, Holmes sensed a current of intent, a predator's gaze hidden among the flock. Their plan was simple yet precarious. Holmes had learned from Finch, the nervous Soho tailor, of a mask crafted for a mysterious client, a half-faced design of black velvet, adorned with silver filigree and a single sapphire at its brow. If Lady Eleanor Voss, the reclusive aristocrat whose absence after the auction had raised Holmes' suspicions, was indeed the phantom, she might wear that mask tonight. The ball, with its promise of anonymity, was the perfect venue for her to strike again or to meet an accomplice. Holmes steered Watson toward the edge of the dance floor, where couples spun in a waltz, their masks glinting like stars. Keep your eyes on the women, Watson, he murmured. The phantom's signature is precision, not flamboyance. Look for a mask that commands without shouting. Watson scanned the crowd, his brow furrowing. And if it's not Lady Voss? We're chasing a ghost, Holmes. Then we shall exorcise it, Holmes replied, his voice low but firm. Every ghost leaves a trace. As the quartet struck up a new waltz, Holmes' gaze locked onto a figure across the room. She stood alone near a marble pillar, her posture regal yet guarded. Her mask was precisely as Finch had described: black velvet, silver filigree, and a sapphire that caught the chandelier's light like a captive star. Her gown, a deep emerald silk, clung to her frame with tailored elegance, its train pooling like liquid night. She moved not to dance but to observe, her gloved hands clasped lightly, betraying no haste. There, Holmes said, nodding subtly. Lady Voss, or someone playing her part. Watson followed his gaze, his harlequin mask tilting. She's striking, I'll give you that. But how can you be sure? I'm not, Holmes admitted. But her presence is no coincidence. Watch her movements, Watson. She's hunting, not reveling. The woman glided toward a side table laden with champagne, her steps measured, as if counting the beats of the music. Holmes noted the way her eyes, visible through the mask slits, darted across the room, lingering on Sir Reginald Harrow himself, who stood near the orchestra, his lion mask roaring with gilded excess. Harrow was a known collector of rare gems, and rumors swirled that his private vault held treasures rivaling the crown jewels. If the phantom sought a new prize, Harrow was a likely target. Holmes tugged Watson's sleeve. Come, we must get closer. They wove through the crowd, Holmes' cloak blending with the shadows, Watson's doublet drawing a few amused glances. As they neared the woman, Holmes caught a glimpse of her dance card, dangling from her wrist on a silver ribbon. It was no ordinary card. Its edges were gilded, and a faint scent of jasmine clung to it. Holmes' mind raced. Jasmine was rare, a perfume favored by those with access to exotic imports. A clue, perhaps, but not enough. "Excuse me, madam," Holmes said, stepping into her path with a courtly bow. His voice was smooth, tinged with the cadence of a foreign noble. "Might I claim the next dance?" The woman turned, her sapphire mask glinting. Her eyes, a sharp hazel, studied him with a mix of amusement and wariness. "You presume much, signore," she replied, her voice low, with a trace of an accent Holmes couldn't place, cultivated, perhaps to obscure her origins. "I dance only with those I know." "Then let us become acquainted," Holmes countered, offering a gloved hand. "A single waltz can reveal much." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her fan. Then, with a slight incline of her head, she accepted. "Very well, one dance." As they stepped onto the floor, the quartet launched into a lilting Strauss waltz. Holmes guided her with precision, his movements fluid yet controlled, allowing him to study her closely. Her grip was firm, her steps flawless, but there was a tension in her frame, as if she were poised to flee. Her mask, up close, was a work of art. Finch's craftsmanship was unmistakable, down to the delicate silver threads woven into the velvet. "You move like a man accustomed to command," she remarked, her tone teasing yet probing. "Are you a soldier, perhaps, or something more enigmatic?" Holmes chuckled, letting his mask conceal his scrutiny. "And you, madam, move like one who knows the weight of secrets. Tell me, what brings you to this masquerade?" "Curiosity," she sighed, her lips curving, "and the promise of beauty. Sir Harrow's collection is said to be unparalleled." Holmes' pulse quickened. "A slip, perhaps." "Indeed, his gems are the talk of London. Have you a favorite?" Her eyes flickered, a momentary lapse. "Sapphires," she said softly. "They hold the night in their depths." Before Holmes could press further, a commotion erupted near the ballroom's entrance. A young man in a jester's mask stumbled forward, his hands fumbling at his waistcoat. "My watch!" he cried, his voice slurred with champagne. "It's gone! Someone's picked my pocket!" The crowd murmured, heads turning. Holmes released his partner, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. Pickpockets were common at such events, but this felt orchestrated, a distraction, perhaps, to cover a larger move. He glanced back at the woman, but she was already slipping away, her emerald gown vanishing into the throng. "Watson!" Holmes hissed, grabbing his friend's arm. "Follow her. She's our key." Watson nodded, plunging into the crowd as Holmes moved toward the jester. The young man was surrounded by concerned guests, his mask askew, revealing a flushed, boyish face. Holmes knelt beside him, his fingers brushing the man's waistcoat. A faint tear in the fabric confirmed his suspicion. A skilled cut, not a clumsy grab. "Describe the thief," Holmes demanded, his tone sharp but low. I didn't see," the jester stammered. "It happened so fast. I felt a tug, and then my watch was gone. Gold, with a chain. My father's." Holmes' mind raced. A pickpocket bold enough to strike in this crowd was no amateur. He scanned the room, noting the exits to main doors, a servant's passage, and a balcony overlooking the gardens. The woman in the sapphire mask was nowhere in sight, but Watson's burgundy doublet was visible near the servant's passage, where he was questioning a waiter. Holmes joined him, his cloak billowing. "Anything, Watson?" The waiter, a wiry man with nervous eyes, shook his head. "I saw nothing, sir. Just guests, coming and going." Holmes' gaze fell on a crumpled napkin on the floor, half hidden by a curtain. He retrieved it, unfolding it to reveal a scrawled note in elegant script. "Midnight exchange, West Wing." The ink was fresh, the jasmine scent faint but unmistakable. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice taut with excitement. "We have a lead. The West Wing at midnight. The Phantom plans to move." Watson glanced at his pocket watch. "That's less than an hour away. What's the plan?" "We observe," Holmes replied. "But first we find our masked lady. She's no mere guest." They split up, Holmes taking the West Wing's corridor. A dimly lit passage lined with portraits of Harrow's ancestors. The air was cooler here, the music a distant hum. Holmes moved silently, his eyes scanning for any sign of the emerald gown or sapphire mask. At the corridor's end, a door stood ajar, leading to a private salon. Inside he glimpsed a flicker of movement, a gloved hand adjusting the curtain. He slipped inside, his senses alert. The salon was a treasure trove of Harrow's collection. Jade figurines, gold snuff boxes, and a glass case holding a single emerald pendant, its facets glinting like a forest fire. The woman in the sapphire mask stood before it, her back to him, her fingers hovering over the case's lock. Admiring. "The view?" Holmes said, his voice cutting through the silence. She froze, then turned slowly, her mask unreadable. "You're persistent, signore. And you're bold," Holmes countered, stepping closer. "A thief in plain sight is a rare creature." Her laugh was low, almost musical. "A thief? You flatter me. I'm merely appreciating art." "Then you won't mind if I join you," Holmes said, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe, blocking her exit. "That pendant, for instance. A fine piece, but not the sapphire brooch you stole at the auction." Her eyes narrowed, but her composure held. "You're mistaken. I'm no thief." "Then explain this," Holmes said, producing the napkin with the midnight note. A curious choice of stationery for an innocent guest. She stiffened, her gloved hand twitching toward her reticule. Holmes tensed, ready for a weapon, but she merely smiled. "You're clever," she said. "But cleverness can blind as much as it reveals." Before Holmes could respond, a shadow moved behind him, a second figure, cloaked and masked, emerging from behind a tapestry. Holmes spun, but too late. A blackjack struck his temple, and the world blurred into darkness. When he awoke, his head throbbed, and the salon was empty. The emerald pendant was untouched, but the napkin was gone. Watson burst in, his face pale. "Holmes, I found you slumped here. Are you all right?" Holmes touched his temple, wincing. "A minor inconvenience. The Phantom's accomplice, no doubt. Did you see her, the woman in the sapphire mask?" Watson shook his head. "She vanished. But I found this dropped near the servants' passage." He held up a small brass key, its bow engraved with a delicate V. Holmes took it, his mind clearing. "Voss," he murmured. "Or someone close to her. The midnight exchange is our next move, Watson. The Phantom is bold, but they've underestimated us." As the clock struck 11, Holmes and Watson positioned themselves in the West Wing's shadowed alcove, overlooking the small courtyard where the exchange was to occur. The night air was crisp, the stars obscured by London's fog. Holmes' mind churned, piecing together the evening's clues: the sapphire mask, the jasmine scent, the brass key, the cryptic note. The Phantom was no lone operator. They had allies, perhaps a network, and this ball was a nexus of their plans. At midnight, a figure emerged into the courtyard, a man, not the woman, his face hidden by a plain black mask. He carried a small velvet pouch, its weight suggesting something precious inside. Holmes signaled Watson to stay put, then slipped down a side stair, moving like a wraith. The man glanced around, nervous, then placed the pouch on a stone bench. Holmes waited, his breath steady. Another figure approached, a woman, but not in the emerald gown. Her mask was simple, her cloak nondescript. She retrieved the pouch, slipping it into her sleeve, and vanished into the fog. Holmes pursued, his cloak blending with the shadows. The chase led through Claridge's gardens, where roses loomed like sentinels in the mist. The woman was fast, her step silent, but Holmes was faster. He cornered her near a fountain, its water glinting under a single lantern. "Enough games," Holmes said, his voice low but commanding. "The pouch, if you please." She turned, her mask revealing nothing. "You're too late," she said, her voice unfamiliar, not the woman from the dance. "The exchange is done." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Then tell me who you serve? The Phantom? Lady Voss? Or another?" She laughed, a sharp, defiant sound, and tossed the pouch into the fountain. Holmes lunged, but she darted past, disappearing into the night. He retrieved the pouch, its velvet soaked, but intact. Inside was not the sapphire brooch, but a single black feather mocking deliberate. Watson joined him, panting. "Holmes, what the devil happened?" Holmes held up the feather, his expression grim but resolute. "A taunt, Watson. The Phantom is playing a deeper game. But this key," he held up the brass V, "will unlock their secrets. The night is not lost." As they returned to Baker Street, the fog thickened, cloaking London in mystery. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the Phantom's elusive trail. The masquerade had been a gambit, but not a defeat. The brass key, the black feather, the midnight exchange, they were pieces of a puzzle that was at last taking shape. The Phantom was close, and Holmes, with Watson at his side, was closer still. Chapter 6. Midnight at the museum. The fog clung to London like a conspirator's cloak, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cry of a night watchman. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved silently through the shadowed streets, their breaths visible in the chill November air. The British Museum loomed ahead, its grand facade a silent sentinel under the gaslight's flicker. Holmes' eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the perimeter, noting the faint glow of a lantern near the eastern entrance, an anomaly in the stillness. "Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low, "our quarry is near. That lantern is no curator's doing. The Phantom moves with purpose tonight." Watson, clutching his service revolver beneath his overcoat, nodded grimly. "A midnight exchange, you said. But why here?" "The museum's a fortress." "Precisely why," Holmes replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "A fortress hides secrets better than a hovel. The Phantom thrives on audacity, and what better stage than the heart of London's antiquities? Come, we must be swift." They slipped through a side gate, left ajar by a careless guard or, more likely, a deliberate hand. The museum's vast interior was a labyrinth of echoes, its galleries shrouded in darkness save for the occasional glint of moonlight on marble. Holmes led the way, his steps precise, navigating the corridors as if they were etched into his mind. Watson followed, his senses heightened, every creak of the floorboards a potential threat. They reached the Egyptian wing, where towering statues of pharaohs stood like silent judges. Holmes paused, raising a hand. "Listen," he whispered. A faint shuffle, barely audible, came from the direction of the Rosetta Stone's display. Holmes gestured toward a shadowed alcove, and they concealed themselves behind a granite obelisk, its surface cool against Watson's palm. Moments later, two figures emerged into the dim light. One was slight, cloaked in black, their face obscured by a hood. The Phantom, Watson was certain. The other was a wiry man, his movements nervous, clutching a small parcel wrapped in cloth. The exchange was swift. The cloaked figure handed over a leather pouch, and the wiry man passed the parcel. Holmes' eyes narrowed as he watched, his mind cataloging every detail, the angle of the cloaked figure's shoulders, the faint tremor in the courier's hands. "Now," Holmes hissed, and they sprang from their hiding place. Watson's revolver gleamed in the moonlight as he shouted, "Stand where you are." The wiry man froze, his eyes wide with panic, but the cloaked figure moved like quicksilver. With a flick of their wrist, they hurled a small object to smoke. Bomb, Watson realized too late. A cloud of acrid gray enveloped the gallery, stinging their eyes. Coughing, Watson fired blindly, the shot echoing like thunder. When the smoke cleared, the cloaked figure was gone, leaving only the wiry man, now sprawled on the floor, clutching the parcel. Holmes was at his side in an instant, wrenching the parcel free. "Speak, man," he demanded, his voice cutting through the courier's whimpers. "Who is the phantom? What is this?" The man, trembling, stammered. I don't know their name. They paid me to deliver this. Said it was for a collector. That's all, I swear." Holmes tore open the cloth, revealing a sapphire brooch, or so it appeared. His fingers traced its edges, and his expression darkened. "A fake," he muttered. "Cleverly done, but glass and paste, not gemstone. The phantom plays a deeper game." Watson, still scanning the shadows, asked, "Where did they go? There's no exit here." Holmes' gaze darted to the floor, where a faint scuff mark marred the polished stone. He knelt, running his fingers along the edge of a display case. With a soft click, a panel swung inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. "An old curator's route," Holmes said, his voice tinged with admiration, "used during renovations decades ago. Our phantom is well versed in London's secrets." Without hesitation, Holmes plunged into the passage, Watson close behind. The air grew damp and heavy, the walls rough-hewn stone. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space, and Watson's heart pounded, half expecting an ambush. The passage twisted downward, opening into a small forgotten office, its air thick with dust. A single oil lamp flickered on a desk, illuminating maps and papers scattered across its surface. Holmes seized a map, his eyes scanning it with ferocious intensity. "London's underground," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "Sewers, old tunnels, forgotten cellars, the phantom's escape routes. See here, Watson, these markings. They converge at Blackfriars Bridge, a smuggler's haven, if I'm not mistaken." Watson peered over his shoulder, noting the meticulous annotations. "They've planned this for months, haven't they?" "Years, perhaps," Holmes replied, folding the map and tucking it into his coat. "The phantom is no mere thief. This is a campaign, Watson, a war waged in shadows. But we have their scent now." As they prepared to leave, Watson's foot caught on a loose floorboard. He knelt, prying it up to reveal a small tin box. Inside was a single black feather, identical to the one left at Claridge's. "Another taunt," Watson said, holding it up. Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Not a taunt, Watson. A signature. The phantom wants us to know they're watching. But they've underestimated us. This office, these maps, they're a treasure trove. We'll turn their own tools against them." They retraced their steps, emerging into the museum's silent halls. The night was far from over, and Holmes' mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next move. As they stepped back into the fog, Watson felt a thrill of anticipation. The phantom was elusive, but Holmes was relentless. The game was afoot, and the museum's secrets had only sharpened their resolve. The next morning, Baker Street was a hive of activity. Holmes sat cross-legged on the floor, the stolen map spread before him, surrounded by books on London's subterranean history. Mrs. Hudson bustled in with tea, her disapproval evident as she navigated the clutter. "Mr. Holmes, you'll ruin your eyes in this gloom," she chided, drawing the curtains. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes said absently, his attention fixed on a diagram of Blackfriars Bridge. "Watson, consider this. The phantom's use of the museum's passage suggests intimate knowledge of its layout. Few have such access. Curators, perhaps, or someone with ties to the museum's past." Watson, nursing a cup of tea, frowned. "A curator? But the staff were all accounted for during the auction." "Precisely," Holmes said, his fingers drumming a rapid rhythm. "Which suggests our phantom is either a former employee or has suborned one. We must visit the museum again, under guise of inquiry. I want to see the curator's records." By midday, They were back at the British Museum, posing as insurance assessors investigating the attempted theft. The head curator, a wiry man named Mr. Percival Grayson, greeted them with a mix of suspicion and fatigue. His office was a stark contrast to the forgotten one below, polished, orderly, with shelves of meticulously labeled artifacts. "Gentlemen," Grayson said, adjusting his spectacles, "I assure you, our security is impeccable. Last night's incident was an anomaly. The passage you mentioned hasn't been used in years." Holmes' eyes flicked to the curator's hands, noting a faint ink stain on his cuff. "Indeed, Mr. Grayson, yet someone knew of it. Tell me, who has access to the museum's architectural plans?" Grayson hesitated, his fingers twitching. "Only senior staff. The plans are kept in the archives, under lock and key. And have any been consulted recently?" Holmes pressed, his tone deceptively mild. Grayson's gaze darted to a filing cabinet. "Not to my knowledge. But I'll check if you insist." "Do," Holmes said, his smile sharp. As Grayson rummaged through the cabinet, Holmes leaned toward Watson and whispered, "Watch his hands. He's nervous." Sure enough, Grayson's movements were jerky, and when he produced a folder, a small slip of paper fluttered to the floor. Watson retrieved it, noting a scrawled address, 12 Ravens Lane. Holmes' eyes gleamed as he pocketed it without a word. Back at Baker Street, Holmes cross-referenced the address with his maps. "Ravens Lane," he mused. "A stone's throw from Blackfriars. This is no coincidence, Watson. Tonight we investigate." Dusk found them in a narrow alley off Ravens Lane, where a dilapidated warehouse sagged against the skyline. The air reeked of river mud and tar, and the distant hum of the Thames was a constant undertone. Holmes, disguised as a dock worker, in a rough cap and coat, picked the warehouse lock with practiced ease. Inside, crates were stacked haphazardly, their contents hidden beneath canvas tarps. Watson's lantern cast flickering shadows as they searched. "What are we looking for?" he whispered. "Evidence," Holmes replied, prying open a crate. Inside were artifacts, vases, statuettes, a jade pendant, all bearing the marks of illicit trade. Stolen goods, Watson. The Phantom's network extends far beyond the sapphire brooch. A sudden creak froze them in place. Footsteps echoed from the rear of the warehouse, deliberate and unhurried. Holmes doused the lantern, pulling Watson behind a stack of crates. 2 men entered, their voices low but distinct. "The boss ain't happy," one growled. "That museum job went south. Holmes is sniffing around." "Let him sniff," the other said, his tone colder. "The Phantom's got plans. The Tower Job's next. Bigger haul, bigger risks." Watson's grip tightened on his revolver, but Holmes' hand stayed him. The men moved on, their voices fading. Holmes waited until silence returned before speaking. "The Tower of London," he said softly. "Ambitious. We've stumbled into the heart of their operation, Watson." They slipped out, unnoticed, and returned to Baker Street under cover of night. Holmes spread the museum's map alongside his own notes, his mind a whirlwind of connections. "The Phantom's reach is vast," he said, "but their arrogance is our advantage. They believe themselves untouchable. We'll prove them wrong." Watson, exhausted but exhilarated, asked, "What's our next move?" Holmes' eyes glinted with resolve. "We follow the trail to the tower. The Phantom's planning a heist, and we'll be there to spring the trap. But first, we need more on this Ravens Lane connection. Tomorrow, we dig deeper." As the fire crackled in the hearth, Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. The museum's secrets had given them a foothold, but the Phantom remained a shadow, always one step ahead. Yet Holmes' confidence was unshaken. The chase was far from over, and the game had never been more exhilarating. Chapter 7. Tunnels of Deception. The fog clung to London's underbelly like a conspirator, shrouding the entrance to the subterranean tunnels beneath the city's pulsing heart. Sherlock Holmes stood at the mouth of a disused sewer grate near. Blackfriars Bridge, his lean silhouette barely discernible in the gaslight's feeble glow. The air was thick with the stench of damp stone and decay, but Holmes' eyes gleamed with a predator's focus. Beside him, Dr. John Watson adjusted his scarf, his breath visible in the chill, his revolver a reassuring weight in his coat pocket. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his voice low but taut with unease, "are you certain this is the path? These tunnels could stretch for miles, and we've no map to guide us." Holmes' lips twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "My dear Watson, maps are for those who trust the surface. The Phantom has left us something better, a trail of intent. The velvet scrap from the dockyard, the smuggler's whispers, the very audacity of their scheme, they all point downward, to the veins of London where secrets fester." Watson frowned, peering into the black maw of the tunnel. "And if it's a trap, then we shall spring it," Holmes replied, his voice sharp as a blade. He adjusted his deerstalker, its brim casting a shadow across his angular face, and produced a small lantern from his satchel. With a flick of his wrist, he ignited it, casting a warm, flickering light that barely dented the darkness. "Stay close, Watson. The Phantom is cunning, but their arrogance will be their undoing." They descended, the iron rungs of the ladder slick under their boots. The tunnel swallowed them whole, its walls glistening with moisture and streaked with centuries of grime. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the city above pressed its weight upon them. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern sweeping across the stone, searching for signs. Only he could see scratches on the walls, scuffs in the dirt, the faintest disturbance in the stillness. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 10 minutes, they reached a fork. 3 tunnels branched off, each a yawning void. Holmes knelt, his gloved fingers tracing a faint mark in the dust of boot print. Fresh and deliberate, its sole marked with a distinctive crosshatch pattern. "This way," he murmured, pointing to the leftmost tunnel. "Our quarry is meticulous, but not infallible. This print matches the one I noted at the dockyard. We're on their heels." Watson gripped his revolver tighter, his heart thudding. "You're certain it's the Phantoms?" "Not the Phantom themselves," Holmes corrected, rising. "An accomplice, likely. The Phantom is a shadow, Watson. They don't tread so carelessly. But their network is fraying, and this print is a thread we shall pull." They pressed on, the tunnel narrowing until the walls seemed to close in, brushing their shoulders. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water and the soft crunch of their steps. Holmes' lantern cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. Watson's unease grew, his soldier's instincts prickling. "Holmes, this feels too quiet. If they're smuggling artifacts, where are the guards? The traps?" Holmes paused, his head tilting as if listening to the tunnel itself. "Patience, Watson. The quiet is their first defense, a lure to complacency. But I hear it now." He held up a hand, silencing Watson's protest. "Listen, a hum, faint but steady. Machinery, perhaps, or ventilation. We're nearing something significant." They rounded a bend, and the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling supported by crumbling brick arches. The hum was louder now, a low throb that pulsed through the stone. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden crate, its lid ajar, revealing a glint of gold and crystal within. Stacks of similar crates lined the walls, each marked with cryptic symbols that Watson couldn't decipher, but knew Holmes would unravel in moments. "A smuggler's cache," Holmes said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. He approached the open crate, his lantern illuminating a collection of artifacts, golden statuettes, jeweled daggers, a chalice encrusted with emeralds. Babylonian, I'd wager, or perhaps Assyrian. Stolen from a private collection, no doubt. Destined for the black market. He picked up a small, intricately carved amulet, turning it in his fingers. The Phantom's reach extends far beyond the sapphire brooch. Watson scanned the chamber, his revolver at the ready. "This is too easy, Holmes. Why leave such treasures unguarded? Holmes' eyes narrowed, his gaze darting to the shadows. They haven't. His voice dropped to a whisper. Step lightly, Watson. The floor, before he could finish, a metallic click echoed through the chamber. Watson froze, his boot hovering over a stone tile that had sunk slightly beneath his weight. A low rumble began, growing into a deafening roar as the walls trembled. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the floor beneath the crate began to split, revealing a yawning pit. Watson, move! Holmes shouted, seizing his friend's arm and yanking him back. The crate tipped, its contents spilling into the abyss as the floor collapsed inward. Holmes dove to the side, pulling Watson with him, and they landed hard against the chamber's edge. The rumble subsided, leaving only the echo of falling debris and their ragged breaths. Watson coughed, waving away dust. A trap, then. You were right. Holmes' eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction. A crude one, but effective, designed to deter, not kill. The phantom wants their secrets buried, not their pursuers. He rose, brushing off his coat, and scanned the chamber. The pit had swallowed half the floor, but the remaining crates stood intact. We're closer than they'd like, Watson. They're growing careless. As Holmes moved to inspect another crate, Watson noticed something glinting in the rubble. Near the pit's edge, he crouched, retrieving a monogrammed glove, fine leather, stained with dirt, its cuff embroidered with the initials EV in gold thread. Holmes, look at this. Holmes took the glove, his expression sharpening. Eleanor Voss, he murmured. Or someone who wishes us to believe so. The initials are too convenient, Watson. A taunt, perhaps, or a misdirection. He tucked the glove into his pocket, his mind racing. Lady Voss was absent from the auction's end, her estate a fortress of secrets. But is she the phantom, or a pawn in their game? Watson frowned, his practical mind grappling with the implications. If she's involved, why leave such a clue? It's practically an invitation. Precisely, Holmes said, his voice low and intense. The phantom thrives on control, on leading us where they wish. This glove is a breadcrumb, meant to draw us deeper. But I'll not be led blindly. He turned back to the crates, his lantern sweeping over the symbols. These markings cuneiform, but altered. A private code, likely the syndicate's. If we can decipher it, we'll know their next move. Holmes knelt, pulling a notebook from his satchel and sketching the symbols with rapid precision. Watson watched, marveling at his friend's focus. Despite the near disaster. You think the phantom's here, don't you, watching us? Not here, Holmes said, not looking up. But close. Their network is vast, Watson, but not invisible. The dockworker's testimony, the tailor's ledger. Now this cache their threads in a tapestry, and the phantom is the weaver. But even the finest weaver leaves a loose stitch. As Holmes worked, Watson kept watch, his revolver trained. On the chamber's entrances, the hum of machinery grew louder, and he noticed a faint draft from a side tunnel. Holmes, that hum, it's stronger over there. Could be a way out or another trap. Holmes glanced up, his eyes narrowing. Or both, let's find out. He pocketed his notebook and led the way, moving with the silent grace of a cat. The side tunnel was narrower, its walls lined with rusted pipes that hissed faintly, releasing bursts of steam. The hum grew into a rhythmic clank, and soon they emerged into another chamber, smaller but no less startling. A makeshift workshop sprawled before them, lit by flickering oil lamps. Crude tables held tools, maps, and half-packed crates, while a massive iron contraption, a smuggler's press perhaps, for forging or concealing artifacts, dominated the space. Two men stood at the far end, their voices low but heated, unaware of the intruders. Holmes signaled Watson to stay low, and they crept behind a stack of crates. The men's words drifted over, sharp and urgent. Told you. Finch botched it, one growled, his voice rough with a dockside accent. The mask wasn't ready, and now Holmes is sniffing around Soho. "Keep your voice down, you fool," the other hissed, his tone cultured but strained. The Phantom's orders were clear: move the cash tonight. If Holmes is here, we're done for. Watson's grip tightened on his revolver, but Holmes' hand on his arm stayed him. "Listen," Holmes whispered, his eyes locked on the men. "They're frightened. That's our advantage." The cultured man paced, his silhouette revealing a tall, wiry frame. The glove was a mistake. "I told her it was too obvious, but she insisted." "Let Holmes chase shadows," she said. "Now look where we are." Holmes' lips curved into a thin smile. "Her," he mouthed to Watson, his mind clearly racing. He gestured toward a crate near the men, its lid loose. "A distraction, Watson." "On my signal," Watson nodded, his heart pounding. Holmes reached into his satchel, producing a small weighted stone, a relic from a prior case, no doubt. He waited until the men turned away, then tossed the stone with pinpoint accuracy. It struck the crate, knocking the lid askew with a loud clatter. The men spun, cursing, and drew pistols. "Who's there?" The dockworker bellowed, his weapon. "Sweeping the shadows. Now," Holmes whispered. Watson fired a single shot into the air, the sound echoing like thunder. The men dove for cover, shouting, and Holmes was already moving, a blur of motion as he darted toward the workshop's far end. Watson followed, keeping low as the men's shouts turned to confusion. Holmes reached the contraption, his hands flying over its levers. With a wrenching groan, the machine sputtered, releasing a cloud of steam that filled the chamber. The men coughed, their visibility gone, and Holmes seized the moment, tackling the dockworker to the ground. Watson grappled with the other, disarming him with a swift blow to the wrist. "Enough," Holmes barked, pinning the dockworker. "Who is she? The Phantom her name?" The dockworker spat, his face twisted with defiance. "You'll get nothing." "From me, Holmes, she'll have your head first." The cultured man, now disarmed, laughed bitterly. "You're too late, detective. The cash is moving, and the Phantom's already 3 steps ahead." Holmes' eyes blazed, but his voice remained calm. "We shall see." He bound the men's wrists with cord from his satchel, his movements precise. "Watson, search the tables. We need their plans." Watson rifled through the papers, finding maps of London's underground, marked with routes to the Thames. One document caught his eye, a ledger listing artifacts, destinations, and buyers, all in the same coded cuneiform. "Holmes, this is it. Their entire operation." Holmes glanced over, his expression one of grim triumph. "Excellent. But we're not done." He turned back to the men, his voice cold. "Where is she now? The Phantom, where does she hide?" The dockworker sneered, but the cultured man hesitated, his resolve cracking. "You don't understand," he muttered. "She's not just a thief. She's a ghost. You'll never catch her." Holmes leaned closer, his gaze piercing. "Ghosts leave traces, and I am their hunter. Speak, or the next cell you see will be in Newgate." Before the man could respond, a low rumble shook the chamber. The walls groaned, and a cascade of dirt began to fall from the ceiling. Watson looked up, alarmed. "Holmes, another trap." Holmes cursed it under his breath, releasing the dockworker and grabbing Watson. "Run!" They sprinted for the tunnel as the ceiling buckled, stones crashing behind them. The bound men shouted, but Holmes didn't look back, pulling Watson through the narrowing passage as the rumble grew deafening. They burst into the first chamber just as the tunnel collapsed, sealing the workshop and its secrets. Dust choked the air, and Watson coughed, his heart racing. "That was too close, Holmes. We nearly lost everything." Holmes stood, brushing dirt from his coat, his expression unreadable. "Not everything, Watson. We have the ledger, the glove, and a name, her. The Phantom is no longer a shadow." He held up the glove, its initials glinting in the lantern's light. "E.V. Lady Voss, or someone hiding in her shadow. Either way, we've struck a blow to their operation." Watson nodded, catching his breath. But they're moving the cash tonight. We can't let them escape. Holmes' eyes gleamed with resolve. We won't. The ledger will tell us their next move, and the phantom's arrogance will be their downfall. Come, Watson, we return to Baker Street. The game is afoot, and we are closing in. They climbed back to the surface, the fog parting like a curtain as London's gaslights flickered above. Holmes clutched the ledger and glove, his mind already unraveling the next thread in the phantom's tapestry. The night was far from over, and the hunt was only beginning. Chapter 8. The Ladies' Gambit. The morning air in London carried a chill that clung to the cobblestones, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood before the imposing iron gates of Lady Eleanor Voss's estate, a sprawling Georgian manor nestled in the verdant outskirts of Hampstead Heath. The house loomed like a silent sentinel, its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys betraying no hint of the secrets within. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the facade, adjusted his deerstalker with a gloved hand, his mind already dissecting the puzzle that had drawn them here. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low but laced with a spark of anticipation, observe the windows. The second floor, third from the left, curtains drawn, yet a faint flicker of light. Someone is awake, and they do not wish to be seen. Watson, bundled in his overcoat against the autumn bite, squinted upward. A servant, perhaps? Or Lady Voss herself burning the midnight oil? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. Midnight oil is for poets and dreamers, Watson. That light suggests calculation, not reverie. Come, let us test the lady's hospitality. The case had brought them to this moment with relentless momentum. The monogrammed glove bearing, the initials, E.V., found in the smuggler's cash beneath. London's streets had pointed directly to Lady Eleanor Voss, her sudden absence from the Claridge's auction, her known obsession with rare gems, and now this tangible link to the phantom's operations, made her the linchpin of Holmes's investigation. Yet, the detective's instincts warned him that the truth was rarely so straightforward. The phantom's audacity, their meticulous planning, suggested a mind that thrived on misdirection. Was Lady Voss the mastermind, or merely another piece in a grander game? They approached the heavy oak door, its brass knocker gleaming under the weak sunlight. Holmes rapped sharply, the sound echoing through the still morning. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a butler whose gaunt frame and sallow complexion seemed to belong more to a crypt than a manor. His eyes, small and darting, assessed the visitors with thinly veiled suspicion. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, Holmes announced, his tone clipped but authoritative. We are here to speak with Lady Eleanor Voss on a matter of urgency. The butler's lips pursed, as if tasting something sour. Her ladyship is indisposed, he said, his voice a dry rasp. She sees no visitors without an appointment. Holmes's eyes narrowed, catching the slight tremor in the man's hands. Then you will inform her that the matter concerns the Claridge's auction and a certain sapphire brooch. I trust you will find time for us. The butler hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the interior of the house. After a moment, he stepped aside, gesturing them into a grand foyer adorned with marble busts and a sweeping staircase. The air inside was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old money, but there was an undercurrent of unease, as if the house itself were holding secrets. Follow me, the butler said curtly, leading them through a labyrinth of corridors, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Watson's eyes lingered on the paintings, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders with silent judgment. Holmes, however, kept his focus on the butler's rigid posture, noting the way his shoulders tensed as they neared a set of double doors. They were ushered into a drawing room that exuded opulence, from the gilded chandelier to the velvet upholstered furniture. Lady Eleanor Voss sat by a roaring fire, her slender frame draped in a deep emerald gown that contrasted sharply with her pale complexion. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Holmes's, with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. In her hand, she held a delicate teacup, which she set down with deliberate care. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass, "and Dr. Watson, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Holmes took a seat without invitation, his movements precise, almost predatory. "Lady Voss," he began, "I am investigating the theft of a sapphire brooch from the Claridge's auction, an act perpetrated by an individual known as the Phantom. Your name has surfaced in connection with this matter." Her eyebrows arched, but her expression remained composed. "The Phantom? A theatrical moniker for a thief, don't you think? I assure you, Mr. Holmes, I have no interest in such melodramas. I attended the auction, yes, but I left early due to a headache. My absence is hardly evidence of criminality." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Your absence? Perhaps not. But a monogrammed glove, marked with the initials E.V., found in a smuggler's cache beneath London streets, suggests otherwise, as does your well-documented passion for rare gems." Lady Voss's fingers tightened briefly around the arm of her chair, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "A glove? How quaint. Initials are hardly unique. Mr. Holmes, as for my passion for gems, it is no secret. I collect beauty, not scandal." Watson, standing by the hearth, cleared his throat. "Lady Voss, if you have nothing to hide, surely you won't object to answering a few questions. Where were you after the auction? And have you had any dealings with a tailor named Finch in Soho?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Finch?" she repeated, her tone carefully neutral. "I know no such man. As for my whereabouts, I returned home and retired early. My staff can confirm this." Holmes's eyes flicked to the butler, who lingered by the door, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice deceptively mild. "Then you won't mind if we examine your study. Financial records, correspondence, such things often clarify matters." Lady Voss rose, her movements graceful but deliberate. "You overstep, Mr. Holmes. This is my home, not a crime scene. Unless you have a warrant, I suggest you leave." Holmes stood as well, his height and presence filling the room. "Very well, Lady Voss. But know this, the Phantom's trail is warm, and I am not easily deterred. We shall speak again." As they turned to leave, the butler stepped forward, offering a silver tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. "A refreshment." "Before you go, gentlemen, her ladyship insists." Watson reached for a cup, but Holmes's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "Thank you, but we must decline," Holmes said, his eyes locked on the butler's. "We have other matters to attend." The butler's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. Holmes guided Watson out of the room, his pace brisk. As they reached the foyer, he leaned close and murmured, "The tea, Watson. Did you notice the faint bitter undertone in its aroma? Aconite, if I'm not mistaken, a subtle poison, but effective." Watson's eyes widened. "Good Lord, Holmes. You think they meant to silence Watson?" Holmes hissed, his gaze darting to the shadows of the corridor. "We are not yet out of danger." They stepped into the crisp air outside, the gates clanging shut behind them. Holmes's mind was already racing, piecing together the encounter. Lady Voss's composure had been impeccable, but her micro-expressions, the tightened fingers, the fleeting glance toward the butler suggested guilt, or at the very least knowledge. The butler's insistence on the tea was no coincidence. The glove, the auction, the smuggler's cache, all threads in a tapestry that was only now beginning to take shape. "Watson," Holmes said as they boarded a hansom cab back to Baker Street, "we must return under cover of night. Lady Voss is hiding something, and I suspect her study holds the key." That evening, under a moonless sky, Holmes and Watson returned to the estate, clad in dark clothing to blend with the shadows. Holmes had equipped himself with a small toolkit, a lockpick, a penknife, and a vial of luminescent powder for marking their path. Watson carried his revolver, its weight a reassuring presence in his pocket. The estate was silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the wind. Holmes led the way to a side entrance, a servant's door half hidden by ivy. His lockpick made short work of the mechanism, and they slipped inside, moving with the stealth of practiced intruders. The corridors were dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of wax and dust. Holmes navigated the maze of hallways with uncanny precision, his memory of the morning's layout guiding them to Lady Voss's study. The door was locked, but Holmes's deft fingers coaxed it open in moments. Inside, the room was a scholar's haven, bookshelves lined with leather-bound tomes, a mahogany desk strewn with papers, and a massive safe embedded in the wall, its steel face gleaming in the faint glow of a gas lamp. Holmes approached the safe, his fingers brushing the dial. "A Chubb's patent lock," he murmured, "formidable, but not impregnable." He pressed his ear to the metal, turning the dial with delicate precision, listening for the telltale clicks of the tumblers. Watson kept watch by the door, his heart pounding. "Hurry, Holmes," he whispered. "If we're caught, patience, Watson," Holmes replied, his focus unbroken. After several tense minutes, the safe clicked open, revealing a trove of documents, ledgers, and a small velvet pouch. Holmes rifled through the papers, his eyes scanning with lightning speed. "Forged auction bids," he said, holding up a sheet. "Bids placed under aliases, inflating the prices to cover the theft. Clever." He opened the pouch, revealing a single black feather identical to the one left at Claridge's, the Phantom's calling card. Holmes said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, "Lady Voss is either the Phantom or their accomplice." Before they could delve further, a creak echoed from the hallway. Watson spun, his revolver drawn, but it was too late. The door burst open, and the butler lunged forward, a syringe glinting in his hand. Holmes reacted instantly, seizing a heavy book from the desk and hurling it at the man's chest. The butler staggered, and Watson tackled him, pinning him to the floor. "Speak," Holmes demanded, looming over the struggling man. "Who do? You serve? The Phantom?" The butler's lips curled into a sneer. "You'll get nothing from me, detective." Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold determination. "We shall see." But before he could press further, a wave of dizziness swept over him. Watson, too, swayed, his grip on the butler loosening. The room tilted, and Holmes's keen senses registered the faint, acrid scent in the air gas, released from some hidden vent. The butler, unaffected, wriggled free and bolted from the room, locking the door behind him. Holmes staggered to the desk, his mind racing despite the fog clouding his thoughts. "Watson." "The coal chute," he gasped, pointing to a grate in the corner, "our way out." They stumbled to the chute, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Holmes pried open the grate, revealing a narrow, soot-stained tunnel. With effort, they squeezed through, sliding down into the damp, cold cellar below. The fresh air revived them, and Holmes's sharp mind snapped back into focus. "Drugged tea was too obvious," he muttered, brushing soot from his coat. "They anticipated our return and prepared a trap. Clever, but not clever enough." Watson, panting, checked his revolver. "What now, Holmes? The butler will alert Lady Voss." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Let them. We have what we came for." He produced a folded letter from his pocket, pilfered from the safe. Unfolding it, he read aloud, "The syndicate awaits the Phantom's delivery. The tower is the prize. Midnight, the 10th. The Tower of London," Watson breathed. "They're planning something big." Holmes nodded, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "Indeed, Watson. Lady Voss may not be the Phantom, but she is a cog in a larger machine. We have unmasked one layer of the conspiracy. Now we hunt the syndicate." As they slipped out of the cellar into the night, Holmes's mind was already mapping the next move. The letter, the forged bids, the black feather, all pieces of a puzzle that was growing ever more intricate. The phantom's shadow loomed large, but Holmes was undeterred. The game was afoot, and he was one step closer to its heart. Chapter 9. The Syndicate's Shadow. The East End pub reeked of stale ale and damp wood, its air thick with the murmurs of men who thrived in London's underbelly. The Rusty Anchor, a squat soot-stained building tucked between a pawnshop and a fishmonger's stall, was a haven for those who preferred their dealings cloaked in shadow. Sherlock Holmes, disguised as a grizzled fence named Jack Cutler, leaned against the bar, his sharp eyes scanning the room through a haze of pipe smoke. His coat, deliberately frayed at the cuffs, and a battered cap pulled low over his brow, completed the illusion of a man who'd spent years bartering stolen goods. Dr. John Watson, posing as his rough-edged associate, sat at a corner table, nursing a pint and pretending to read a crumpled newspaper. Though his gaze flicked nervously to Holmes every few seconds, the pub was alive with the low hum of clandestine deals. Dock workers, pickpockets, and smugglers mingled, their voices a tapestry of coarse laughter and whispered secrets. Holmes had chosen this place after days of meticulous tracking, following the threads of the Phantom's network from the docks to Soho, and now here, where the syndicate's pulse beat strongest. The black feather, the velvet scrap, the monogrammed glove all pointed to a larger conspiracy, and tonight, Holmes intended to pull the veil back further. He sipped his ale, the bitter tang grounding him as he observed the room. A group of men, huddled in a booth near the back, their heads bent close, their gestures tense. One of them, a wiry man with a scar snaking across his cheek, kept glancing toward the door. Holmes noted the bulge of the concealed pistol under his coat. Another, a burly figure with a thick beard, clutched a leather satchel, his knuckles white. The third, a slight man with darting eyes, seemed to be the leader, his voice low but commanding. Holmes strained to catch their words. But the pub's din swallowed them. Watson caught his eye, tilting his head slightly toward the trio. Holmes gave a nearly imperceptible nod, signaling patience. They'd been here an hour, blending into the pub's chaos, waiting for the Phantom or a sign of their next move. The coded message from the auction ledger had led them here, hinting at a meeting that could expose the syndicate's plans. Holmes had deciphered it as a directive to meet at the Anchor under the hunter's moon. And tonight, the moon hung low and full, casting a ghostly glow over London's rooftops. Door creaked open, and a new figure entered, cloaked in a heavy overcoat, despite the muggy night. A hood obscured their face, but the way they moved, fluid, deliberate, with a predator's grace, sent a ripple of recognition through Holmes. The Phantom, he was certain. The figure didn't approach the bar or any table but slipped toward a narrow staircase at the back, vanishing into the shadows of the upper rooms. The scarred man in the booth tensed, his hand drifting toward his coat. Holmes set his glass down, his mind racing. The Phantom's presence confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary meeting. The syndicate was planning something bold, something that required the Phantom's direct involvement. He adjusted his cap, adopting a slouch, and muttered to the barkeep about needing the privy. The barkeep, a grizzled man with a missing tooth, grunted and pointed toward the stairs. Watson folded his newspaper, standing as if to stretch, and followed at a distance. Holmes ascended the creaking stairs, his senses attuned to every sound, a clink of glasses below, the muffled thump of boots above, the faint drip of a leak somewhere in the walls. The upper floor was a warren of dim corridors lit by flickering gas lamps. The air was heavier here, laced with the musty scent of old wood and something sharper, gunpowder, perhaps, or the acrid tang of chemicals. He paused at a corner, listening. Voices drifted from a door at the end of the hall, low and urgent. Holmes crept closer, his boots silent on the worn floorboards. Watson joined him, his revolver tucked discreetly under his jacket. Holmes pressed his ear to the door, catching fragments of the conversation. "The tower job is set for the 10th, the slight man's voice hissed. "The guards' schedules are secured. We've got the keys." "And the phantom's cut?" Another voice, gruff and skeptical, likely the bearded man. Half as agreed. The slight man snapped. "No one crosses them. Not after what happened to Finch." Holmes' lips twitched. The tailor's fate likely grim, given his nervous confessions, confirmed the syndicate's ruthlessness. The mention of the Tower of London sent a jolt through him. A heist at the tower was audacious, even for the phantom. The crown jewels. Perhaps, or something equally valuable. He needed more. He glanced at Watson, who nodded, his hand steady on his revolver. Holmes reached into his coat, retrieving a small device, a crude but effective listening tool he'd fashioned from a stethoscope, and a brass funnel. He pressed it against the door, amplifying the voices. "The sapphire's still the key," the slight man continued. "It's not just a bauble, it's leverage. The buyer in Paris will pay double if we deliver it with the rest." Holmes. Mind word. The sapphire brooch, stolen from Claridge's, wasn't the endgame but a piece of a larger puzzle. Leverage for what? Blackmail? A trade? And Paris, a new thread to follow. A sudden creak behind them made Holmes freeze. He turned, his hand slipping to the knife in his boot. A shadow loomed at the end of the corridor, a barmaid, her tray laden with tankards, staring at them with suspicion. Watson stepped forward, adopting a drunken slur. "Oi, love, where's the privy?" He mumbled, swaying slightly. The barmaid's eyes narrowed, but she jerked her thumb toward a door down the hall. "That way, and don't be skulking about." Watson tipped his cap, stumbling toward the door as if lost. The barmaid lingered a moment, then descended the stairs. Holmes exhaled, returning to the device. The conversation inside had shifted. "The phantom's already here," the scarred man muttered. "Saw them slip in. They're watching." "Then we stick to the plan," the slight man said. "No mistakes. The explosives are ready, and the tunnel's clear." Explosives, tunnel. The tower heist was no mere smash and grab. Holmes' pulse quickened, but he kept his breathing steady. He needed to see the phantom, to confirm their presence, and if possible, mark them. He rummaged in his coat, producing a small vial of phosphorescent powder, a concoction of his own design, invisible in dim light, but traceable under ultraviolet. If he could dust the phantom's cloak, he could track them later. The door suddenly swung open, and Holmes yanked Watson into an alcove, pressing them against the wall. The slight man emerged, his eyes darting down the corridor. He didn't notice them, his attention fixed on the stairs. He muttered something about checking the back and disappeared below. Holmes seized the moment, slipping toward the door, which had been left ajar. Inside, the room was cramped, lit by a single lantern. The bearded man sat at a table, the satchel open to reveal maps and diagram schematics of the tower's defenses, marked with red ink. The scarred man stood by a window, peering into the night. And there, in the corner, stood the phantom, their hooded cloak blending with the shadows. Their face was obscured, but their posture was unmistakable, taut, alert, commanding. Holmes moved silently, his fingers dipping into the vial. He edged closer, using the bearded man's bulk as cover. The phantom's cloak hung loosely, perfect for a subtle dusting. He flicked his wrist, sending a fine mist of powder onto the cloak's hum. It settled invisibly, and Holmes retreated, his heart pounding with the thrill of success. But the phantom's head snapped toward him, as if sensing the intrusion. Holmes froze, his disguise suddenly feeling thin. The scarred man turned, his hand on his pistol. "Who's there?" he growled. Holmes adopted his fence's drawl, stepping into the light. "Jack Cutler, mate. Heard there's a job going. Big one." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, but the bearded man waved him off. "He's one of ours. Seen him at the docks." Holmes suppressed a smirk. His groundwork spreading rumors of Jack Cutler's reputation had paid off. The phantom remained silent, their gaze boring into him. He felt the weight of their scrutiny. But he held his ground, slouching casually. "Talk's cheap," the slight man said, re-entering the room. "What's your play, Cutler?" "Got a buyer lined up," Holmes said, improvising. "Rare gems, big payouts. Heard you lot have something. Sparkly." "Talk's cheap," the slight man said, re-entering the room. "What's your play, Cutler?" "Got a buyer lined up," Holmes said, improvising. "Rare gems, big payouts. Heard you lot have something. Sparkly." The phantom tilted their head, a faint rustle of their cloak. Holmes' powder was in place, but he needed to keep them talking. "The sapphire," he pressed. "Worth a fortune, yeah?" The slight man laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "You're fishing, Cutler. Stick to your lane." The phantom raised a gloved hand, silencing him. Their voice, when it came, was low, distorted by a scarf or mask. "You're bold, Mr. Cutler. Too bold." Holmes' pulse spiked, but he grinned, leaning into the role. "Bold's how I stay alive." The phantom stepped closer, their cloak brushing the floor. Holmes caught a faint whiff of lavender, a curious detail for a master thief. "Prove your worth," they said, "or you'll find the East End less welcoming." Before Holmes could respond, a shout echoed from below, raucous, panicked. The scarred man rushed to the window, cursing. "Coppers!" "Someone tipped him!" Chaos erupted. The bearded man grabbed the satchel. The slight man drew a knife, and the phantom vanished through a side door, their cloak billowing. Holmes and Watson bolted for the stairs, blending into the fleeing crowd. Outside, police whistles pierced the night, and constables swarmed the street. Holmes cursed under his breath. He hadn't anticipated a raid. They slipped into an alley, Watson panting, but alert. Holmes pulled a small ultraviolet lamp from his coat, scanning the ground. A faint glow marked the phantom's path, the powder shimmering under the light. "Got them," he murmured, a thrill of satisfaction coursing through him. The trail led through twisting alleys, past overflowing bins and flickering street lamps. Holmes moved swiftly, Watson at his heels, the glow guiding them like a ghostly thread. The trail ended at a derelict warehouse, its windows boarded, its door ajar. Holmes paused, listening. Silence, save for the distant clamor of the police dot inside. The warehouse was a maze of crates and rusted machinery. The powder's glow led to a trapdoor, barely visible under a pile of sacks. Holmes lifted it, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Watson hesitated, his hand on his revolver. "Holmes, this feels like a trap." "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. "But the phantom's down there, and so is the truth." They descended into a damp, brick-lined tunnel, the air thick with mildew. The powder's trail glowed faintly, leading deeper into the labyrinth. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together the syndicate's plan. The tower heist, the Sapphire's role, the phantom's elusive presence. The tunnel opened into a chamber where crates of dynamite and stolen artifacts were stacked high. A single lantern flickered, casting long shadows, and there, at the far end, stood the phantom, their cloak discarded, revealing a lithe figure in black. They were examining a map, unaware of Holmes' approach. He signaled Watson to stay back, then stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Evelyn Voss, I presume?" The figure froze, then turned, their mask glinting in the lantern light. "You're persistent, Mr. Holmes," they said, confirming his deduction. "But you're too late." Before Holmes could respond, a click echoed, a tripwire triggered. The chamber rumbled, dust falling from the ceiling. Holmes lunged, tackling Watson as a section of the wall collapsed, blocking their exit. The phantom was gone, their laughter echoing in the dark. Holmes rose, brushing off dust, his mind already working. The tracker's signal was still active, pulsing faintly in his pocket. The phantom had escaped, but they'd left a trail. He turned to Watson, a grim smile on his lips. "We're close, Watson. Very close." The chapter ended with Holmes monitoring the tracker's signal, satisfied with infiltrating the syndicate's plans, even as the weight of the tower heist loomed. The game was afoot, and the phantom's shadow was growing sharper. Chapter 10. The Tower Heist. The fog clung to London like a conspirator's cloak, swirling around the ancient stones of the Tower of London as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson crouched behind a crate near Traitor's Gate. The night was sharp, with autumn's bite, and the Thames murmured secrets to the shadowed walls. Holmes' eyes, keen as a hawk's, scanned the battlements where the syndicate's operatives were rumored to be staging their audacious heist. The tracker he'd planted on the phantom's cloak in the East End pub pulsed faintly on a device. In his pocket, a bespoke contraption Mycroft had grudgingly supplied. Its signal had led them here, to the heart of England's fortified history, where the crown jewels gleamed under lock and key, and where, Holmes suspected, the phantom intended to strike next. "Watson," Holmes whispered, his breath barely stirring the mist. "The syndicate's plan is no mere smash and grab. The phantom's moves are chess, not checkers. They've chosen the tower for its symbolism as much as its spoils." Watson, his revolver nestled reassuringly in his coat, nodded grimly. "Symbolism or not, Holmes, if they breach the jewel house, it'll be a national scandal. The papers will howl for weeks." "Precisely why we must act with precision," Holmes replied, adjusting his deerstalker to shield his eyes from the drizzle. "The tracker indicates the phantom is already inside. We have minutes, not hours." The tower's silhouette loomed, its turrets piercing the fog like silent sentinels. Holmes had studied its layout meticulously. The white tower at the center, the jewel house within the Waterloo block, and the myriad passages, some forgotten, that threaded the fortress like veins. The syndicate's plan, overheard in the smoky din of the East End pub, was to steal a lesser-known artifact, a scepter rumored to hold a hidden compartment, while distracting the yeoman warders with a stage disturbance. Holmes had no intention of letting them succeed. They crept along the outer wall, keeping low to avoid the sweep of gaslights. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together fragments from the past weeks: the black feather at Claridge's, the coded ledger, the velvet scrap, the monogrammed glove. Each clue pointed to a mastermind who thrived on misdirection, yet the tracker's signal was a rare misstep. The phantom, Holmes deduced, was not infallible. A muffled shout broke the silence, followed by the clatter of boots on cobblestones. Holmes gestured for Watson to follow, and they slipped through a narrow archway into the tower's inner ward. There, near the Wakefield Tower, a group of men in dark cloaks wrestled with a guard, who was swiftly overpowered and bound. Holmes noted the efficiency, no wasted movements, no unnecessary violence. "Professionals. Distraction," Holmes murmured. "The real work is elsewhere." He led Watson toward the Waterloo block, where the jewel house lay. The tracker's signal grew stronger, a steady pulse guiding them through the maze of stone corridors. They paused at a corner, where Holmes peered around to see two figures tampering with the side entrance's lock. One was broad-shouldered, wielding a crowbar. The other, slighter, moved with a familiar grace. "The phantom," Holmes signaled Watson to ready his revolver but stay hidden. "We need them inside," he whispered. "If we strike now, we lose the scepter and any chance of the phantom's accomplices." Watson's jaw tightened, but he nodded, trusting Holmes' gambit. The door gave way with a soft click, and the figures vanished into the jewel house. Holmes counted to 10, then motioned for Watson to follow. They entered through the same door, which the intruders had left ajar in their haste. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished metal and old stone. The jewel house was a vaulted chamber, its cases gleaming with treasures under dim electric lights. The scepter, Holmes knew, was displayed in a less prominent case near the back, a deliberate choice to avoid drawing attention. The phantom and their accomplice moved swiftly, bypassing the crown and orb for the scepter's case. Holmes watched as the slighter figure produced a set of lockpicks, working with surgical precision. "Remarkable," Holmes muttered, almost admiringly. "The Phantom's hands are as steady as a surgeon's." Watson shifted, his grip tightening on the revolver. "Holmes, we can't let them take it." "Patience, Watson. The scepter is bait. The real prize is what's inside it." The case's lock yielded, and the Phantom lifted the scepter, its gold catching the light. The accomplice, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, produced a small tool to pry open a concealed panel in the scepter's shaft. Holmes' eyes narrowed as a folded parchment emerged, a map. He suspected to the secret auction in Paris the syndicate had planned. "Now?" Holmes hissed. He sprang forward, Watson at his heels. The accomplice spun, drawing a knife, but Watson's revolver was faster, leveled at the man's chest. "Drop it," Watson barked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. The Phantom, however, was already moving, darting toward a side passage. Holmes gave chase, his long legs closing the distance. The Phantom's cloak billowed, the tracker's signal now a redundant guide as Holmes relied on his senses. The passage twisted, descending into a damp, stone-lined tunnel beneath the tower. Holmes' footsteps echoed, but the Phantoms were silent, their movements almost ghostly. "Stop!" Holmes shouted, more to gauge their reaction than to expect compliance. The Phantom didn't falter, but a faint clink reached Holmes' ears, a dropped object. He skidded to a halt, spotting a small brass key on the floor. Pocketing it, he resumed the chase, but the tunnel forked, and the Phantom's figure vanished into the left branch. Back in the jewel house, Watson had subdued the accomplice, binding his wrists with a cord from his coat. The scepter lay on the floor, its hidden compartment open, the parchment gone. Watson cursed under his breath. "They got the map, Holmes." Holmes returned, breathing steady despite the sprint. "Not entirely, Watson. The Phantom dropped this." He held up the brass key, its intricate engravings catching the light. "And we have their accomplice. The night is not a total loss." The bound man glared, his scar twitching. "You've no idea what you're meddling with, Holmes." He spat. "The Phantom's got plans bigger than you can fathom." Holmes crouched, meeting the man's gaze. "Then enlighten me. Who is the Phantom, and what does the map lead to?" The man smirked, revealing a chipped tooth. "You'll find out when you're staring at a knife in your gut." Watson tightened the cords, eliciting a wince. "Mind your tongue, or you'll be explaining yourself to Scotland Yard." Holmes stood, his mind already racing ahead. "No matter. The key will tell us more than this gentleman's bravado." He examined the key, noting its craftsmanship likely French, given the filigree. "Watson, secure the scepter and alert the warders. I'll ensure our friend here is delivered to Lestrade." As Watson escorted the prisoner to the towers, guardhouse, Holmes lingered, inspecting the jewel house for further clues. The Phantom's escape was too clean, too calculated. The dropped key was no accident. It was bait, meant to lure him. Yet Holmes couldn't resist. The key's engravings matched a style he'd seen in Parisian lockmakers' shops. Confirming his suspicion, the syndicate's next move was a broad dot by dawn. The tower was abuzz with warders and police. Lestrade, bleary-eyed but impressed, took custody of the accomplice, who remained stubbornly silent. Holmes and Watson retreated to Baker Street, where Holmes spread the scepter's case blueprints across the table. Cross-referencing them with the key's design, the map they took, Holmes said, lighting his pipe, "is to a secret auction in Paris. The Phantom plans to fence the sapphire brooch there, among other treasures. This key likely opens a safe or a door at the auction's venue." Watson poured a brandy, his hands still steady from the night's exertion. "Paris, then. We're to chase this ghost across the channel?" Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of pursuit. "Indeed, Watson. The Phantom believes they've outmaneuvered us, but they've left a trail. This key, this map, they're invitations to the final act." He booked passage on the next steamer to Calais, his mind already mapping Paris's underworld. The tower heist had been thwarted, the scepter secured, and the accomplice captured, but the phantom remained a shadow just beyond his grasp. Holmes leaned back, satisfied with the night's work, but hungry for the chase's climax. Paris awaited. And with it, the unraveling of the phantom's grand design. The steamer's horn sounded in his imagination, a call to the next battlefield. Holmes smiled, the game afoot. Chapter 11. Parisian pursuit. The train from London to Paris sliced through the dawn, its wheels humming a relentless rhythm against the tracks. Sherlock Holmes sat by the window of their first-class compartment, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the rolling countryside, though his mind was elsewhere. Weaving through the labyrinth of clues that had led him across the channel, Dr. John Watson, seated opposite, flipped through a French newspaper, his brow furrowed as he struggled with the language. The sapphire brooch, the star of Khartoum, was still at large, and the elusive phantom, the mastermind behind its theft, had slipped through Holmes' grasp in London. Now a dropped ticket stub had pointed them to Paris, where a secret auction promised answers and perhaps the brooch itself. "Holmes," Watson said, folding the paper with a sigh, "are you certain this auction is worth chasing? The phantom's been one step ahead at every turn. What makes you think they'll show their face in Paris?" Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "The phantom thrives on audacity, Watson. They didn't steal the star of Khartoum for profit alone. It's a trophy, a taunt. A secret auction in Paris, whispered about in the underworld, is precisely the stage they'd choose to flaunt their prize. And where they flaunt, they falter." Watson leaned back, unconvinced but accustomed to his friend's unshakable confidence. "And this ticket stub you found, how do you know it's not another decoy? They've left false trails before." "The stub was dropped in haste," Holmes replied, producing the crumpled paper from his pocket. "It's for a cabaret in Montmartre, Le Chat Noir, dated tonight. The ink is smudged, the tear uneven marks of a genuine mistake, not a calculated plant. The phantom is human, Watson, and humans err." The train pulled into Gare du Nord under a sky bruised with storm clouds. Paris buzzed with its usual chaos, carriages clattering, vendors hawking, and the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and coal smoke. Holmes, clad in a charcoal overcoat and a flat cap to blend with the crowd, led the way through the station, his stride purposeful. Watson followed, clutching their modest luggage, his eyes scanning the throng for any sign of pursuit. The Phantom Syndicate, exposed at the Tower of London, had eyes everywhere, and Paris was their playground. Their first stop was a discreet cafe near the Seine, where Holmes had arranged to meet an old contact, Monsieur Dubois, a retired detective turned antiquities dealer with a foot in the city's underworld. The cafe was a smoky den, its walls plastered with faded posters of can-can dancers. Dubois, a wiry man with a silver mustache and a penchant for absinthe, greeted them with a nod. "Monsieur Holmes," he said, his voice a low rasp, "you chase shadows again, non? This phantom you seek, they are a ghost in Paris." "Not a ghost, Dubois," Holmes countered, sliding into the booth. "A ghost leaves no footprints. The phantom leaves feathers, ticket stubs, and whispers of auctions. Tell me about Le Chat Noir." Dubois sipped his absinthe, his eyes narrowing. "The cabaret is a front. Beneath its stage lies a chamber where the elite bid on forbidden treasures, stolen art, cursed relics, jewels with bloody histories. Tonight they say a cursed emerald, the tear of Kali, will be sold. But the auction is invitation only, and the host, a man called Le Corbeau, trusts no one." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Le Corbeau the Raven, a fitting alias for our phantom, or perhaps their broker. Can you get us in?" Dubois hesitated, swirling his glass. "It will cost you, and not just money. Le Corbeau's men are everywhere. One wrong move, and you'll find a knife in your back. Watson bristled. We've faced worse than knives, monsieur. Name your price. Dubois smirked, sliding a folded paper across the table. 200 francs, and you wear these. Inside were 2 invitations, forged with exquisite precision, naming them as Belgian art dealers. Be it Le Chat Noir by 10. And Holmes trust no one, not even the shadows. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Holmes, ever meticulous, scouted Montmartre, mapping the cabaret's exits and noting the burly men loitering near its doors. Watson, meanwhile, secured disguises, false mustaches, tinted spectacles, and tailored suits that transformed them into passable Belgians. By evening, the streets of Montmartre pulsed with life, gaslights casting a golden glow over cobblestones. Slick with rain, Le Chat Noir loomed ahead, its black cat sign swinging in the breeze, its windows alive with raucous laughter and accordion music. Inside, the cabaret was a fever dream of decadence. Red velvet draped the walls, chandeliers dripped with crystal, and performers in sequined costumes twirled across a stage lit by flickering lanterns. The air smelled of perfume, cigar smoke, and danger. Holmes and Watson, now Monsieur Laurent, and Monsieur Dubois, presented their invitations to a scar-faced doorman, who scrutinized them before waving them through. Watson's pulse quickened as they descended a spiral staircase hidden behind a mirrored panel, leading to the secret auction chamber. The chamber was a stark contrast to the cabaret's gaiety, a cavernous room lit by candelabras, its stone walls echoing with the murmurs of masked bidders. Velvet-covered tables displayed artifacts, a jade idol with glowing eyes, a dagger encrusted with rubies, and at the center, the Tear of Kali, a massive emerald that seemed to pulse with malevolent light. Holmes' eyes, however, sought the crowd, searching for the phantom's telltale grace. There, he whispered, nodding toward a figure in a silver mask and black cloak, their movements fluid yet deliberate. The posture, the economy of motion, it's them. Watson squinted. You're sure? Half this room is masked. The phantom's presence is unmistakable, Holmes said. Watch their hands, never idle, always poised. They're waiting for the right moment. The auction began, led by a gaunt man in a raven-feathered cape-lee corbeau. His voice, smooth as velvet, announced each lot with theatrical flair. When the Tear of Kali was presented, the room tensed. Bids climbed rapidly, written on cards, and passed to silent attendants. Holmes, playing his role, bid modestly on a lesser item, his eyes never leaving the silver-masked figure. Watson, sweating under his disguise, muttered, "If they're here for the emerald, why haven't they bid?" "Because," Holmes replied, "the emerald is a decoy. The phantom wants something else, perhaps the brooch, hidden among the lots." As the bidding for the Tear of Kali reached a fever pitch, silver-masked figures slipped toward a side door. Holmes signaled Watson, and they followed, weaving through the crowd. The door led to a narrow corridor, its walls damp with mildew. Footsteps echoed ahead, quick and light. Holmes moved like a shadow, his revolver drawn but held low. Watson, gripping his own pistol, felt the weight of the chase pressing on his chest. The corridor opened into a courtyard, where a sudden downpour drenched the cobblestones. The phantom stood by a fountain, their cloak billowing as they turned, sensing pursuit. "You're persistent, Monsieur Holmes," they called, their voice muffled by the mask but unmistakably mocking. "But Paris is my city." Holmes stepped forward, rain streaking his face. "And yet you dropped your ticket stub, Phantom." A careless move for a master thief. The Phantom laughed, a low musical sound. Careless or a lure? Your predictable detective. They darted toward an alley, their cloak a dark blur against the storm. Holmes sprinted after them, Watson at his heels. The alleys of Montmartre twisted like a maze, lined with shuttered shops and flickering lanterns. The Phantom was a wraith, leaping over crates and scaling low walls with acrobatic ease. Holmes, undeterred, matched their pace, his mind mapping the terrain. Watson, panting, cursed his age but kept up, driven by loyalty and adrenaline. The chase ended at a dead-end alley where the Phantom scaled a fire escape to a rooftop. Holmes followed, his long limbs finding purchase on the slick iron. Watson, slower but determined, reached the roof just as the Phantom vanished over the edge. A clatter below revealed their escape-awaiting carriage, its driver whipping the horses into a gallop. Holmes stood at the roof's edge, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "They're heading east," he said, his voice calm despite the setback, toward the Gare de l'Est. Watson, catching his breath, noticed something glinting in the gutter. "Holmes, look." It was another ticket stub, this one for a midnight train to Vienna. Another mistake, or another taunt? Holmes picked it up, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Both, Watson. The Phantom wants us to follow, but they underestimate us. Vienna is their next stage, and I'll be there to meet them." They descended to the street, where the cabaret's music still spilled into the night. Holmes paused, his mind already racing ahead. "We need tickets for that train, Watson. And a telegram to Lestrade, have him alert Interpol about the Paris auction. Le Corbeau's operation must be watched." Watson nodded, exhaustion giving way to resolve. "You think the brooch was here tonight?" "I'm certain of it," Holmes said. "Hidden in plain sight, perhaps among the lesser lots. The Phantoms' game is one of misdirection, but they've revealed their pattern. They thrive on the chase as much as I do." As they hailed a cab to the station, the rain eased, leaving Paris glistening under a crescent moon. Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled, his mind a whirl of calculations. The Phantom had escaped, but the ticket stub was a breadcrumb, and Holmes was a hunter who never lost the scent. The chapter closed with the cab rattling toward the Gare de l'Est, the city's lights fading behind them, and the promise of Vienna looming ahead, a new battlefield in a game that was far from over.